If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
Outdoors people, share your paranormal encounters, weird creature sightings, or creepy experiences in the outdoors, woods, or forests.
At a house in the country, I was trying to get my grandparents' dog back inside around 10 p.m. She was standing facing me in the middle of the field out back and wouldn't come when I called her. I left the porch, and when I was about 20 feet from her, I realized she looked kind of wrong. Her back legs looked extended, and she looked kind of ragged and bony, a lot taller than I thought she should be, but clearly still a German Shepherd. Then I heard her barking aggressively behind me, turned around to see that she was in the doorway, and I just sprinted back inside. The other Nikita was gone when I turned around, but Nikita barked at the door for another 10 minutes before we all got her to calm down. Everyone told me it was probably a bear or mountain lion, but it looked just like a messed up version of her. Since we were in the middle of the woods, we also didn't have any close neighbors, making it unlikely that the creature was someone else's dog. I lived in a very rural area growing up and have had more than enough encounters with something unexplained. The first that comes to mind is a day I was walking along a game trail in the woods behind my house. It was about a 2-mile walk to a small lake with an abandoned cabin. I had gone there often, but on this day I didn't make it. At the end of the trail and just before the cabin, the woods open up into a clearing about 40 to 50 yards long, and across the clearing I see what looks like a large boulder. I was very confused because it had never been there before. I began walking towards it, and as I got closer, I noticed it moving, kind of lightly swaying side to side. I stopped walking when I was about 20 yards away and studied it more closely, suddenly realizing that this boulder was actually a giant figure crouched down. No sooner than I had that realization, it turned, and I was able to see its head. Though I couldn't make out distinguishing features, I could tell it had long red hair and an equally long red beard, though it was balding directly on top. Its clothes were gray/green and tattered. In hindsight I would say he looked pretty distressed. It began standing up, and I felt a surge of fear wash through me, and I just started to run, and I didn't look back. I tried to tell my mom, but she didn't believe me. I've told her the story again now that I'm older, but she thinks I'm just misremembering things. To me, it's a very vivid memory. This was last week. I and my mother-in-law were sitting outside talking and smoking a blunt. We hear something strange about 30 feet away right in front of us, and we go, "Oh, hell no." She presses the emergency button, which for us lights up all 5 acres of the house and surrounding areas. It doesn't light up the fields but lights up the whole fence line around us. So right in front of me, standing taller than a cargo container, was a genuine Skinwalker. Not even 2 minutes go by after the lights are activated, we see it clearly, and it drops to all fours and crawls away faster than a dirt bike into the pasture. Needless to say, we stay armed anywhere near dark and don't go into the pasture alone. I had been a deep forest, off-grid explorer up until about 5 years ago because it is intense on the body. Not a treasure hunter. When you head off the path, it's thick. First the trash disappears. There are no trails available except for those made by game animals. You start seeing trees and patches that have not been logged. I've found human bones, Native American rock dwellings with everything intact, old ghost towns, abandoned primitive cabins, foundations, mountain people who never go to town, mine shafts, dangerous, Native American rock wall art, carved stones, and come face to face with bears, cubs, mountain lions, etc. Lots of pottery. A couple of Native American slab graves. Even low-quality emerald where there should be none, tons of killer fossils. Then there are the WTF items. When you come upon those, you have a few decisions to make. First, do you need to back out? Second, would you ever want someone else to disturb it? Third, do you need to plot and mark and contact the right authorities and universities? I've run into 2 living humans on 2 different occasions and have never told anyone jack and never have or will write it down. Nothing alien. I was surprised that I was not killed both times, and every single movement I made while backing out was well thought out. I grew up in the deep national forests and go even deeper. To places where if you get hurt and don't have a sat phone, you could easily die. I can only imagine what rangers find. To get crazy deep, you need a helicopter service. My guess, based on a few situations I've lived, that most officials would not document because doing so would hurt their career. It's not like these things are in your backyard. They don't impede. I have seen a bunch of stuff I have not explained yet. I debunk and am a skeptic by nature. There is a lot of unsettled land out there. Conventionally settled. Thunderbird Flock when I was 10. I believe that I was only about 10 or 11 at the time. It was a clear, sunny day, and the temperature outside was cool. All of a sudden, a flock of massive brown birds appears in the sky. There were 7 of them. Although I spend a lot of my time outdoors and see various species of birds, they didn't look or fly like any bird I've ever seen. Not to mention, they were much too large. They soared very slowly, and their wings seemed very stiff and motionless. It was almost as if they were floating like a kite. They were also very high up in the sky. At first, I thought they were some kind of eagle, like a golden eagle, but golden eagles don't live in my area. Besides, their wingspans were huge. I'm guessing anywhere from 20 to 30 feet. It was an eerie experience, and it leaves me puzzled to this day. I have a grandma and grandpa who go out on long fishing/hunting trips. On the first day of their trip, they do not catch anything at all. Camp out in a tent. In the middle of the night, Grandma wakes up and swears she hears what sounds like somebody walking around the tent and knocking on it. She wakes up her husband, but he tells her to sleep. Later on that night, he's the one who wakes up, and now he's hearing things. But he claims he's hearing what sounds like whispering. He stays up until sunrise, wakes up his wife, and they continue their trip. As the day ends, they catch a couple of squirrels and consider returning home. Grandma insists on just going home after last night, but her husband wants to stay one more night to go fishing in the morning. The compromise is that they sleep in the back of their truck since they have a shell, sleeping mats, and sleeping bags. That night neither of them can fall asleep. Both doze off here and there, but ultimately they're still a bit shook from the previous night. A few hours go by, and suddenly they both hear what sounds like tapping against the car. The tapping moves around the car, almost as if someone is circling it. They're terrified at this point. They're stuck in their truck in the middle of nowhere, so they have no signal. They simply wait it out. The tapping goes on and off for what they claim to be hours. They claimed that at certain moments, the car would tremble violently, and they would hear sounds akin to conversation. Finally, after what seemed to be ages, it stops. They wait about 30 minutes, and nothing happens. They immediately bolt out and drive home. Needless to say, they don't ever go on trips like that on their own anymore. There is no logical explanation for this, it's just truly bizarre. So I want to give a bit of pretext before explaining this so you get the full grasp of this. I grew up in the woods with no neighbors and surrounded by federally protected land from the wildlife refuge. We were the only house on this long stretch of road that leads to the parkway, so besides cars passing by, it was very isolated and secluded from society. I was intimately familiar with these woods. I knew every tree and was outdoors from dawn to dusk, sometimes even sleeping in a tent outside. I was a wild, feral child and would rather be out than indoors. So now allow me to explain this weird happening. I came across it one day. I was probably around 9 or 10, and I believe it was around September. The day was gloomy, with intermittent rain showers throughout the morning. This was my favorite time to go out and walk around the woods. Everything always felt fresh and serene, as you could hear the sound of raindrops tapping on the leaves and the blue jays cawing from all over, and the smell of cedar trees and damp soil. So I make my way to the woods directly behind our house and walk behind a huge brush pile. I immediately notice something so freaking strange and unexplainable. A large tree stump was covered with a pink and silver decorative foil. On this foil was yellow Easter grass you find in Easter baskets, and it was spread around the top of the stump and was wet and limp. Additionally, there were about 3 plastic Easter eggs and some jelly beans scattered around the yellow grass, along with several chocolate eggs wrapped in foil, most of which had already been eaten, leaving only their crumpled wrappers behind. The scene was set against a backdrop of gray skies, rain, and nothing but trees in an eerie silence. So what immediately freaked me out was that Easter was months and months ago, and the more scary fact was that it wasn't there the day before. So who did this, and why? Remember, there were no neighbors or people around, and this part of our property was covered by a huge brush pile that created a blind spot. Behind it, the area leads directly into the wetlands, which is a dead end. The only entrance to our property is from the driveway on the opposite side, while everything else is surrounded by marsh. Furthermore, whoever set this up was trying to stay hidden and out of sight. The image of this scene is etched vividly in my mind, constantly unsettling me and leaving me with more questions than answers. Anyway, let me hear your thoughts. Something tall and dark stared at me from the woods, and I've never been the same since. This happened 2 to 3 years ago in my village. I don't believe in the supernatural. I have always been the type of person who tries to explain things logically. But this thing I saw doesn't fit into anything I can explain. We had an outdoor toilet behind the house, near the edge of the woods. One evening I was heading there, and out of the corner of my eye I noticed something standing beyond the tall wire fence. At first I thought it was a person. But then I realized, it was way too tall. Taller than the fence. It was as thin as a stick. Its arms were unusually long, with fingers that seemed to hang too far down. The head was small, narrow, and stretched downward, like a long vertical block. Its face, there was nothing there. Just a black void. No features, no expression. Like a blank mask made of darkness. It was staring straight at me. Then it leaned forward, slow, deliberate, and kept looking. I froze. My whole chest tightened, like something ancient and wrong had just noticed me. I couldn't look away. I blinked, focused, even squinted. It wasn't in my imagination. It was real. It just stood there, watching. Then it slowly turned and walked away, its posture slightly hunched, arms swaying behind it. The way it moved didn't feel human at all. No sound. No footprints. Just gone. A couple of days later, I went back to the toilet during the day, and suddenly, from deep in the forest, came this scream. It was not a human scream. The sound was raw and unnatural. Despite the sun shining, the chilling sound struck me deeply. It screamed again, louder, and I swear the trees themselves felt like they were holding their breath. I didn't even try to investigate. I just turned around and ran. What really messed with my head is that it felt personal. Like whatever that thing was, it had come back. Not to show itself, but to let me know it was still there. Watching. I still don't know what I saw. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. And I know I wasn't dreaming, I was wide awake, and I've never forgotten a second of it. Has anyone ever seen or heard anything even remotely similar? I'm open to theories, but I'm not making any of this up. I just want to understand what the hell that was. Thanks for listening. I went to a private elementary school that took the 4th, 6th graders on a week-long trip to the Olympic Peninsula every year. Normally we do these in early spring, but I guess due to scheduling issues, we went in October one year. The ELC was very nice, featuring cabins and various amenities, and we had a lot of fun each time while being minimally supervised in the woods. A part of this whole thing involved a night hike where we'd take red flashlights and try to spot nighttime wildlife or listen for owls and bats and things like that. Well, the night we were out doing this, a massive wind and lightning storm hit. We were spared the torrential downpour until we got back, but our counselor, in all his infinite hippie wisdom, decided it was a wonderful time for us to experience the dark forest in all its glory. So we're put into pairs and seated under trees around this big field. Don't get me started on why that was an awful idea in a lightning storm, and told to turn off our lights and just sit quietly. The next closest pair of kids was maybe 20 yards away. We're sitting there in near pitch darkness listening to the trees creak ominously and the tall grass in the field whipping about, and suddenly the field is lit up by lightning, and there's a man just casually strolling by. The man in question was not our counselor. Not any of the adults with us. He didn't have a backpack, or a light, or anything that would indicate he was a camper or backpacker. A rumble of thunder and flash of lightning later, and he's a bit further on in the field but has stopped all movement. A minute or two later the field lights up again, and he is just booking it into the cover of the trees. Our counselor collected us pretty quickly and hustled us back to camp after that. It's possible it could have been one of the wild men we have living in the rainforest, but the camp was a good 70 to 80 miles from where they normally like to live. Definitely not super creepy like some of the stories here, but still very scary for a group of 9-11-year-olds out in the woods at night. My family owns a farm. We have an acreage ghost. Our farm has 7.5 acres. We have goats, chickens, turkeys, dogs, and cats. We also had cows at that time. My aunt's family lives on our land with us, and we all do stuff around the farm. Milking, gathering eggs, feeding animals, etc. About a year ago, my aunt was walking through our pasture out to the chicken pen we had set up to shut them in for the night. We had a few goats in an electric fence by the front of our property. As she was walking back to her house, she heard a female voice saying, "Hi goats, hi goats. Goaty, goaty, goaties." In a kind of high-pitched way. Nobody was outside but her. Super weird. My brother was feeding our dogs when he heard a female voice saying here, "Chicky chicky chickies" to the baby chicks that were at the front of our property, the same spot as the goats were a week prior. Again, super weird. My cousin was over for the weekend, like 3 weeks after the second incident happened. My cousin and I were standing on the deck, at night, when we both turned, at the same time, toward a female voice singing. I was freaked. That was the first time I had heard anything, and it scared me. At that point, my dad began keeping a bat by the door. Maybe a month later, my aunt and mother were in the barn with the goats, unable to exit. I walked in, and they asked if I had been playing with the dogs and talking to them. I had not. I had just walked outside, straight to the barn. Plus, the dogs were not there. They said they heard a female voice, which sounded like mine, talking to the dogs just outside the barn. It is important to note that my mother, my aunt, and I are the only women living on the property. There are 2 little girls, but it's a young woman's voice people keep hearing. They say that sounds like me. So yeah. Super freaky. This has been going on for a long time. We always joke around if things get lost or moved. Maybe the acreage ghost took it. Well, if it wasn't you, it must have been the acreage ghost, things like that, lol. Thanks for listening. Any similar experiences? And thoughts on what it could be? Oh, yeah. Only old women live around us, and it'd be super weird for them to show up. I live in a suburb near a big city that has millions of people. But the experience itself was just so unnatural I seriously still can't shake it. I can actually pinpoint the exact night that this occurred since I track the moon phases and which zodiac sign it happens to be in. This happened on the night of August 3, 2020, precisely. Being a night owl myself, I just like to sit under the moon when it's full. This should have been common sense, but it was way darker outside than I thought it'd be that night. Even if it's a full moon, it's still incredibly dark outside if it's your only source of light. I thought, what the hell, it's after 3 a.m., and my family and probably everyone else in my suburb has surely gone to sleep by now. This would be a perfect time to go sit outside in the dark with the moon as my only source of illumination. And so I did just that, and it was peaceful for a while. Until the whistling started. It sounded like a definite male voice whistling a tune of some kind. It was some distance away for sure, but still close enough that I could hear it. What really freaked me out, though, was the fact that it started as abruptly as it stopped. Like, the equivalent of someone stopping mid-sentence. Everything about it was so unnatural. My neighborhood is extremely dark and quiet at night. It is very, very unusual for anyone to be awake, let alone whistling a tune. Especially after 3 a.m. but before 4 a.m. in the morning. I don't even really know how you can call that morning, as it's definitely still night. I was creeped out enough that I went back inside quickly after that happened. But it wasn't until after I had told this to my boyfriend that I got extra creeped out. He told me that in many cultures, whistling at night is said to attract bad luck, bad things, and evil spirits. And sure enough, if you just Google it, it pops up right there on Wikipedia. Now this could just be a superstition, and what I heard could have just been a person. But I'm telling you, everything about it was so unnatural and out of place. Scout camp sighting. I was at a large scout camp with over 100 scouts, which felt more like a rally than a typical camping experience. We were sleeping outdoors. There was a huge football field in front of our tents, and there was a really big forest behind the football field, opposite our tents. I was playing Brawl Stars in my tent with my friend, and suddenly I heard marching, but I asked my friend if he could hear anything, and he said he didn't. It was really loud, and I looked outside. I saw military soldiers with arisakas with bayonets, which was an old gun used in World War II. My uncle collects antique guns, so I know a little about guns. I told my friend to come out and look, but he said he saw nothing, which really confused me. I saw the soldiers march into the foggy forest. I was kind of scared, so I went back into the tent. I have a house in Tasmania, on top of a hill. Quite isolated and about 30 minutes away from anyone. The history of the hill is unclear, but about 90 years ago there was a bakery situated upon the hill, and for unknown reasons this bakery was burnt down. Nothing remained of it apart from a concrete slab that we use for putting dead thorns and dead wood on. The actual house, built several years after the incident, has truthfully seen better days but is still in great condition, minus a few leaks that appear every once in a while. I called this house home for a number of years but moved away, then returned, then moved, then returned. It was a cycle that my entire family was getting sick of, leaving the place we cherish only to come back to it, but in worse condition. Growing up there, I have many memories of the outdoors, as it's a large property, about 5 acres. These memories are full of laughter and delight, but what I can remember of the inside of the building is filled with discomfort and a sense of unease, especially as a young child. It was at this property that several strange and unexplainable things have occurred, both good and bad and creepy and or unnerving. But to state that only creepy things took place there would be a lie. I have had several encounters, if you would, of a scary nature, and even to this day have many people state that only scary shit happens when in or around. Moving shadows or creaking floors can be explained most of the time, but distinct voices of my father, who wasn't within 70 kilometers of my house, become harder to put up to something like it was the wind. At this property of mine, We have many things my mother would call spirits, and I don't care if you believe in them or not, they exist, at least around my family. 2 of these spirits are distinct to me and my father because they only play tricks on the 2 of us. We have both seen them, respectively, but only ever when we're together. One of them lives inside and moves things around, like chairs, and opens doors that shouldn't open. I have heard this thing call out to me many times before, but I placed it up to me hearing things because it always happened when other people were inside the house. But there was one time that I refused to enter the house for 5 hours straight one afternoon, as I distinctly heard my father's voice screaming at the top of his lungs, calling for help over and over again, but the cry was the same every time, the same volume, the same tone. It went on for about 3 to 4 minutes before complete silence. At this time, however, my father was at work in town, about 75 kilometers away from my current location. I have no idea what it is, but I know that it's a small creature, about 3 feet in height, and only ever shows itself when you're alone or with either my father or me. The other one is much larger in stature, standing at around 5 feet. From what we can tell, it's a lot more calm and doesn't make much noise above a regular conversation, and on many accounts it has shown itself fully, but only crouched or hunched over. Both of these entities have no complexion and show no face. Only when hiding does this thing show its true height, from around trees and such, almost like a shy child. My father swears on everything he holds dear. He has heard this creature call out to him, saying things like "Dad, Dad, come here," or "Dad, I need you." On several accounts has this happened. We will be moving from this place once more. My only hope is that we never return. For I truly fear that if we were to ever come back, we would not leave, not ever, and that someone would read our names off of a headstone. I swear that there is some form of wolfman, dogman, werewolf, shapeshifter, skinwalker, or whatever you want to call it living in my home province. I've heard them, and I swear I've seen them. I grew up out in a rural community, where the closest kids were a 10-minute walk away. We always had wildlife living in our backyard, from bears to coyotes, owls, foxes, even skunks and porcupines. I was very familiar, as my father was a hunter and taught us the sounds and tracks and even the awful smells of the life around us. I'm 20 now and live in a large town on the outskirts of the city. I remember the first signs starting around the age of 14 to 15. I would be trying to sleep with my window open at night during the summer, and I would hear these mutilated howls, the likes of which I've never heard before, which would terrify me into slamming shut my window, closing my blinds, and locking what I could around the home. I would spend time outdoors or walking home from the bus stop and see massive paw prints or sometimes barefoot human prints on the sandy gravel road. There were these moments of awful stench. My mother would always claim it to be just the coons in the compost bins again, but there was no way on earth that's what it was. I began to spend less and less time out there due to feeling watched and unsafe. I didn't know what else to do. My dad left my mom, and my stepfather was a city man who thought I was simply scared to be out because I'm a girl. There was one event 3 years ago, when I was 17. We had a family friend who had a camp 40 minutes out into the middle of nowhere, and of course, being myself, I wanted to go and hang out with all my friends near my age. So we went. No cell service, no plumbing, all electricity was solar powered, outhouse, and all camp on a lake. None of my friends were there, and all the adults went down 3 camps off for drinks, and I was stuck with all the kids 13 and under. Free babysitting, am I right? Anyway, to the point, I had settled in and was reading a book with my flashlight while the kids were watching a movie on their tablet. What's the point of camping if you're on your electronics? And I heard the sound of someone in the driveway, the footsteps on the gravel. I got up from my book and went to see if it was one of the adults from the group, but as soon as I stuck my head out the door, I noticed an awful rotten stench when the sound stopped, and there was no one there. I swear I'd never felt so chilled as I did in that moment. The hair on my neck was raised, and I slammed the door shut, loudly, and locked it. That night when the adults were back, we paired up to go to the outhouse before bed. Of course I and the family friend were the last 2 out there. I had done what needed doing and was waiting for my friend. That's when the twig snapped and the chills were back. I saw movement. A large, dark, almost black dog-like shape was off in the tree line. I froze. It was darting around so fast I wouldn't have believed the speed if I hadn't seen it. My friend came out of the outhouse, and the latch snapped my attention from it to her. She was concerned about how pale I was, but when I tried to point it out, it was gone. Poof. We went inside, and all throughout the night I could hear howling and barks and sounds from outside. It reminded me of the whole laughter sound from hyenas. But every so often there was this awful, deep, choppy howl of a sound no coyote could make. It wasn't the scream of a dying rabbit or the laughter from a fox. It was not natural. The sound was not natural. I tell this because about a month ago I was out with my boyfriend for a light night drive along the coast, off a distance from the city. While he was driving and we were talking, we both saw something massive. It was dark, almost black in color, dog-like in structure, and there was an awful, unforgettable smell in the air. We both were shouting and sped off away from it. I convinced him it was just a black bear, but there was no way. It was far too large and thin for a bear in the late summer. I know it was that thing. But anytime I tell someone about it, I'm told I'm crazy. I'm just hearing coyotes, as we don't have wolves in our province. Should I be worried? Scared even? We live in town close to the city, I wouldn't think it would follow us here. But I can't help but feel anxious. Am I crazy? What is this thing? When I first returned from the war, I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, extra high voltage, the kind on the top of the steel towers. Those are transmission lines, not sub-transmission lines like most intercity lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm, 2008, to go out and repair some lines near the Colorado and New Mexico border. Great pay since it was an emergency call-out, so I agreed. I meet up with my crewmen and head down, from the Colorado Springs area. We get there around 9 p.m. and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for felling lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged differently. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remember seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some light nearby, from a campfire. As soon as I saw the light, I heard yelling coming from that area. It must have been about 200 to 300 yards away, but I heard a woman clearly yelling, and she kept saying, "Someone please help," over and over again. I craned down and start yelling for the other guys. They heard it too and were asking questions. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing, kind of. We jumped in one of the smaller trucks, since it was 4x4, and headed down the road. We looked everywhere for the light but didn't find anything. We drove back and forth multiple times, then slowed down. We rolled the windows down and stopped the truck in about the area the light would be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our truck, so to the north. It sounded like two old people who are having heart attacks. And it was really loud. So now we are on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now and giving the general area we were at. They told us to check to see if we saw anything if we felt safe. Because I had that war veteran attitude, I decided to go take a look. 2 guys came with us, and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently they had a station not too far away, so they said 10 to 15 minutes. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes. Like 1-inchers. We all started walking through the trees with our headlamps on, because it was really dark now. The moaning was still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees and into a small clearing. It looked empty. The moaning stopped, and we checked around. Nothing. We went back to the truck, and as soon as we got to it, we heard the woman yell again. Same thing. "Someone please help." The location was just north of our previous position. One of the guys yelled back, "Where are you?" and got no reply. Then we heard her scream in pain and nothing else. We were already running back north, and the police were showing up. They must have seen us running north because 2 of them came after us. We stopped in the field area, and they stopped with us and asked us what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around, and we saw nothing else. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out with us for a bit. We got back to work on the line and got it fitted. The police stayed parked next to each other talking while we worked. When I craned up, I couldn't see any campfire light or anything. We completed the task in approximately 1.5 hours. When we were packing our tools to head out, one of the cops left and the other came up to us. He told us that just to the west there was a small airplane that crashed and the people burned to death. He said when the police and paramedics got to the scene, they were still on fire, but they were gone. He told us about how 2 bodies were found away from the plane, like they were crawling away from it, and 1 body was stuck in one of the windows. He stated that the incident occurred during the 1970s or 80s. Yeah. We packed up fast and got the duck out of there. So in retrospect, I never saw the fire itself, only the light it cast on the trees. I can't tell you how creepy that shit was to find out afterwards. The voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in an afterlife or something, but this was truly the shit that ducked my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it, though. The cop believed us too but said he didn't hear about any other reports of seeing or hearing anything in this area. This was a service road anyway, so it wasn't traveled too much. While I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for a week every summer. As we got older, we would visit a large rock we called the cliffs and jump off. The rock was only 15 feet tall at the highest point, but the water was really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try to touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took kayaks out to the cliffs to jump on our own. We jumped off several times, and when we got too cold, we took a break on the top of the cliffs to warm up in the sun. As we were sitting there, we noticed a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It was a letter, H. Eventually it sank back into the water, and we lost sight of it. Before we could look away or say anything, another shape was floating upwards. It was the letter E. The letter E eventually sank below, but two more letters, L and P, soon followed. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up and left without saying a word. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it even happened after a while. Several years ago, while serving as a camp counselor, I recounted this story as if it were a haunting tale. I had forgotten about it, and I texted my brother to see if I hadn't just made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we went to the jumping cliffs alone and saw something in the water. He replied yes, that he did remember. I asked him what it was, and his reply was, letters. They spelled hell P. Eerie outdoor ed cabin experience. This story is short but interesting. When I was in 5th grade, it was a school tradition for the class to go to outdoor ed. For people who don't know what that is, it's a program for kids to spend a week with their classmates in the forest learning about nature. We all were put in groups with one leader from our local high school. Each group had its own small cabin to sleep in. The cabin was creepy and ancient. The whole camp was old. The cabin was narrow with bunk beds going down on each side. I had a bad cough that week and had a hard time staying asleep. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. I remember peering out of my bunk at the other girls sleeping. I had a weird feeling I could not explain. I look towards the end of the room and see a white figure that looks like a younger girl. She was translucent, and it looked like she was wearing a dress. I was in pure shock because this was my first time ever seeing a spirit. The figure turned to the nearest bunk and was looking at the girl sleeping. This figure was going bunk by bunk looking at the kids sleeping. I wouldn't say I was scared of this figure, I was more shocked and trying to determine if I was just seeing things. It was just super creepy. Best believe before she got to my bunk, I hid under my sleeping bag. Being that I was so young, this memory is now making more sense to me. I can still remember this experience vividly. Nothing negative happened after that, I was just really creeped out. Has anyone else experienced something unusual during outdoor education? The one I went to was in Santa Cruz, California. The White Man. When I was approximately 10 years old and my younger brother was 8 years old, we resided in a house situated on a vast plot of land covered in trees. This created an ideal environment for our beloved childhood game of hiding and seeking among our friends. On one particular day, during the late afternoon, we were engaged in our usual outdoor play with our neighbors from next door. Meanwhile, my brother was diligently attempting to locate us. Intriguingly, I could hear his voice calling out my name from a short distance away, and there was an evident tinge of fear in his tone. My curiosity overcame me, leading me to explore the cause of his discomfort. As I ventured towards him, I stumbled upon a small clearing nestled under the protective canopy of trees. To our astonishment, this clearing housed an inexplicable entity that defied all logical explanation. It appeared to us as a colossal figure, entirely white in complexion. In the eyes of two young children, it loomed at an astounding height of approximately 10 feet. The sight before us held us spellbound for a moment, captivated by its sheer peculiarity. However, as abruptly as it materialized, it vanished with remarkable speed. It seemed to effortlessly glide through the surrounding trees, rendering our attempts to pursue it futile. Its movements were almost ethereal, as if it were floating through the air. We tracked it as it crossed the road and went to the stream, but then it disappeared. Naturally, we were quite shaken by this occurrence and hurried indoors to inform our parents. However, they were skeptical and suggested that what we witnessed might have been a large white dog or something similar. We were firm in our belief that it was not a dog, but rather a towering figure emitting a white glow. That simply vanished into thin air. We felt no fear when we laid eyes on it, and we never encountered it again. Nevertheless, to this very day, we are both certain that we did indeed witness something. We have contemplated the possibility that it could have been a spirit from one of the numerous old vehicles we discovered on our property. But truth be told, who knows for sure? Something strange is happening in a remote town outside Glacier National Park. There's a little town in remote northern Montana, right on the river just outside Glacier National Park near the Canadian border, where I've had a few experiences I still can't explain. My boyfriend and I go up there a lot in the summer. We're big into fly fishing and rafting, and it's our favorite escape. It's insanely beautiful. There's a bar and music venue and a tiny mercantile at the center of town, but no cell service, no Wi-Fi, and it takes a long drive down a dirt road to get there. Big mountains, a rushing river, and this feeling that you're somewhere different. We always joke that it's a portal. The first strange occurrence took place around 4 years ago. We were up there with 3 friends, staying in a private cabin that belonged to a friend of a friend. It was pretty close to a few other cabins. After grilling and hanging by the fire until around midnight, everyone but my boyfriend and I went inside to sleep. We stayed back to grab something from the truck and ended up just sitting in the truck bed, talking and watching the stars. That's when we heard it. A single loud clap came from somewhere behind us, maybe 100 yards out. A few seconds later, another clap, just one, but this time from our right. Subsequently, another clap emerged from our left. They were spaced out, not fast or random, and each one clearly came from a different direction. Then another clap came from behind us again, only closer this time, maybe 75 yards away. The claps came one by one, loudly, and from various angles. It felt intentional, like something was circling us. At one point, we heard another clap, and dogs in the area started barking. We looked at each other but didn't say a word. We froze. Then we heard one more. This one was so close it felt like it was right there. Without speaking, we both jumped up and sprinted to the cabin. I've never run that fast in my life. It wasn't just being creeped out. It was that full body panic, the kind where your brain is just screaming to get inside. As soon as we shut the cabin door behind us, we heard one last clap. It came from the woods right outside, maybe 15 feet away. Last year we were back in the area, this time camping about 10 miles down the road at a lesser known spot along the river we were floating on during the day. It was a group of us in a few tents, and there was somebody we didn't know staying in a Sprinter van fairly close to us. He was friendly, and we talked to him for a while. He mentioned he used to be in the Air Force. Later that night, our group of 6 or so friends split up. Some were by the fire, a few were down by the river, and someone was off behind the trees peeing, lol. I looked up and saw this fast light in the sky, kind of like a shooting star, coming from the right to the left, but then it suddenly stopped, grew in brightness, flashed, hovered for a second glowing bright, and then shot straight up into the sky incredibly fast before disappearing. Right away, people from all over the campsite started yelling, "Did you see that?" Including the person in the Sprinter van. He came over, saying he saw it too, and told us it wasn't the first time. He said he's seen that same phenomenon twice before at this exact campsite. Considering his background in the Air Force, it definitely gave more weight to how shocked he seemed by it. Later that night we also saw Starlink satellites pass overhead, and those were really easy to recognize and totally different from what we had seen earlier. A month or so later, we were back in town at the bar seeing live music. We started chatting with one of the band members about the area in general, and the topic of the campground came up casually. We didn't say a single word about what had happened to us there. However, the musician remarked, "Damn, that campground is beautiful, but every time I'm there, I see UFOs." We just stared at him. We also have a friend who works for Glacier National Park and has seen or heard about unmarked government vehicles heading into that area more than once. I'll be heading back to that campsite in July and will definitely report back if anything else strange happens. I heard a baby crying outside my window. I live in a very quiet neighborhood, my direct neighbors have all moved out very recently. And generally nothing happens here. Last night around 12:40 a.m. I heard a high-pitched cry loud enough to be heard over my earbuds. I initially thought it was one of my cats, but I looked up to see them both at the window, trying to look outside with very tense posture. By then I had gotten my earbuds out, and I heard it again. A baby is crying just outside. It was so loud and clear and very close. Except it didn't sound right. The only way I know how to describe it is my stomach sank immediately. I tried to call my friend because I was scared. My service and Wi-Fi both went from full bars to nothing as soon as I dialed. The crying continued. I reset my phone and finally got it working again, and the second she answered, the crying stopped. I haven't been able to get the cries out of my head. What does this mean? I heard somewhere it's a warning of something serious, but I don't know. For anyone wondering, no, I didn't acknowledge it in any way. I didn't look or get up. I didn't even tell my friend verbally, I texted her. Can someone please tell me anything about this? The man on a palomino. Growing up in the country was a wonderful experience. While we lacked certain advantages found in the city, we enjoyed magnificent outdoor wonders and a more laid-back environment. Family was all important, and gardening was a passion for me. You knew your neighbors and their relatives and even the peculiar old miser or two. There was also the political couple who would go around before each election to try and garner the votes of your parents for their particular candidate, as well as the general store that had been around for nearly 100 years. The store was owned by a family that collected pictures of all the kids at the grade school and proudly taped them to an ancient mirror. It boasted antiques and curiosities as well as the usual dry goods. Our acreage consisted of a wooded portion and a landscaped portion. The landscaped portion had the house, the propane tank, and a pond. A Frady hole, or storm shelter, was built into the side of a hill that backed up to the wooded portion. We existed without air conditioning for many years as we grew up, and we really did not think much about it. We would have the doors and windows open with screens to keep out most of the bugs. One particular spring we had a bit of rain. The doors to the dining room were open, and, as the sun came out, our dog slept in its warm evening rays. Water still dripped from the trees, and the air smelled fresh and clean. We sat at the table eating our dinner and noticed a man on a palamino crossing over the top of our storm shelter and looking at the ground as if he were following tracks. He wore a poncho and a hat and did not seem to notice us as he rode toward the road. The dogs did not wake up even though we could clearly hear the horse's hooves connecting with the ground as he passed by. The man rode the horse close to the edge of the property abutting the road and then turned into our woods and rode uphill. We all ran outside to see where the horse and its rider had gone. There was nothing there, no tracks in the mud or evidence that he had ever passed at all. He had looked solid but disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. The dogs woke up when we came outside to play with us but did not bark or try to catch a scent of the horse. The man and the horse were spirits. We weren't terrified, just curious. It was around 3 a.m. in a rural area upstate. My boyfriend at the time and I and our friend were outside, joking around as they smoked cigarettes. I must state that we were all completely sober. We were just beyond our porch, my boyfriend was sitting on his bicycle, they were probably talking about the bike. When all of a sudden, our friend looked up with a concerned expression. He took our flashlight and shined it across the street, beyond the creek that was there. Beyond the creek was a steep hill, all covered with slippery autumn leaves. He starts shouting, "Hey, you there, are you okay? You need help? Come on over to us. Are you lost?" We're like, "Who are you yelling at?" And he points. And sure enough, there's a guy there, maybe 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, that kind of build, dressed in hunting gear with the bright orange and camo and the cap and everything. He's so close we can see he's got on round-shaped glasses. All around us are woods with some pretty good deer hunting if you're into it, so we weren't disturbed. Yet. My boyfriend slowly pokes me on the shoulder. He says, "You know, my mom claims that the hill is so steep that she has never even seen a deer on it. How is he standing there like that? How did we not hear him? The leaves are too dry." Our friend is still yelling at the guy, urging him to come over here. I look at him again. The person is standing so still. Watching us. I get the worst feeling in the world, just in the pit of my stomach. In this part of upstate, we've heard the ghost stories. It's one of the oldest places settled in the US. I tapped our friend on the shoulder. The guy on the hill hasn't moved an inch, just staring at us. "We should go inside," I said quietly, and our friend got my meaning. They stubbed their cigarettes quicker than lightning, and we all ran inside. We locked the doors and the windows and huddled in the living room. Later that morning, we checked out the hill. There was no evidence that anyone had been there. No leaves disturbed it, it seemed, nothing. There would have been tracks. It was the creepiest thing I've ever experienced. All three of us saw him. He was as solid as you and me. But he didn't move at all, as still as a painting, just staring at us. Pounding at my window. This used to happen almost daily, but for some reason it stopped in December. My room is not that big. I have a queen-sized bed, a large drawer, and a built-in closet. My bed is under the window, facing the door, with the closet on the right and the drawer on the left. I usually listen to music until I fall asleep, around 10 or 11 p.m. But one night I was really vibing to the music through my earbuds, so I stayed awake a bit longer. It was around 12:30 a.m. when I suddenly felt the bed vibrate, like in Jurassic World when the ground trembles. At first I thought it was just me shifting and shaking the bed. But a minute later the vibrations got worse, and it felt like someone was punching the bed from the window side. Even though I still had my AirPods in, I could faintly hear tapping sounds. I thought it might be a bug or something small, but then it hit me. My AirPods have noise cancellation. I took them out, and I swear the pounding on the bed was real. It was slow but heavy. This went on for a fat minute as I stared toward the window with the curtains closed, of course. Then the pounding turned into light tapping, and that is when I was like, nope. I pulled the blanket over myself, though I have no idea why I thought that would help. Suddenly I heard rats running and scratching inside the walls. It sounded like they were moving from the window toward the closet. I stayed under the blanket until I eventually passed out from the heat. The next morning, when I got ready for school, my mom asked why I was so sweaty. I told her what happened, and all she said was, "Do not open the window." Like, obviously? Why would I even do that? I wanted to clarify, I live in a rural area with the town being about 10 minutes away by car. My closest neighbor is a good 6 to 7 minutes walk away from me. My window is tall and high up, and I have aggressive outdoor dogs. I only had one small tree at the time, which was on the other side of the yard. I want to know what this is, as I'm worried it will return after stopping for a while. I also noticed that things around the house have been moving on their own, which makes me worry that whatever it was got in. Even though the knocking stopped, one day this week all my dogs started barking like crazy right at the window. Twice, and the first one is going to sound like a bullshit story, but I'll swear by it. This past April I was working on the, now defunct, geotrail at Griggstown Native Grassland Preserve. I was having a good time, the caches were intriguing, the trails were fantastic, and the landscape was rewarding for its variation and curiosity. So my guard was down a bit as I was walking between caches, and as I was approaching a fallen tree over a stream, I suddenly realized that all of the natural forest sounds I'd been hearing since I arrived were gone. The only thing making any noise was me. I suddenly got really creeped out. I reached the fallen tree, crossed the stream, and noticed that the water was completely still. At first I thought it was an illusion, so I kicked a bit of debris off the fallen tree into the water, and it just sat there on top of the water, not moving at all. This wasn't unusual, but it was curious. Still creeped out by the silence and looking around a little more than was probably strictly necessary, I finished crossing the log and traveled another 100 or so to the cache. About halfway there the sounds started coming back, and by the time I got to the cache, everything seemed normal again. I signed the cache, traded trinkets, re-hit it, and then had to travel back the way I came to get to the next cache. This time I was paying attention to the background noise and was waiting for it to disappear into silence again, but it didn't. Everything was normal. When I returned to the fallen tree to cross the stream again, I noticed that the water was clearly burbling and flowing as if it had been doing so for years. That really creeped me out, and I decided to cut my geocaching trip short that day. To date, I have no idea WTF happened out there. The second time was this past May. I was wandering around about 15 off trail, and I felt like I was totally in the wild. Nothing was shorter than my hips, and most things were at least a foot over my head. I had been searching for an ammo can for about 15 minutes, despite the terrible GPS bounce, when I heard a large whump sound coming from about 20 feet away, further off the trail, as if something large and heavy had just fallen hard. This was followed by a low-pitched sound resembling a pig squeal that seemed to be slowed down to about 10% of its original speed. The sound lasted about 5 to 6 seconds, then there was total silence. I stood there for literally another 5 minutes, but it was absolutely silent. I started video recording and, as quietly as I could, started making my way over to where the sounds came from. Any time there was a slight noise, I'd freeze and listen, but there was never anything more than a rustling leaf. When I got to the place where I was positive the noise came from, there was nothing there. No marks, no tracks, no disturbed grass or branches, no holes in the ground, nothing. I tracked down a park ranger on my way out and described it to him, and he told me that they're aware of it but don't know what it is, and they get 2 or 3 reports of hearing it every year. Oh, I have one. To preface, before this happened I did not believe in anything paranormal. As a science major, I dismissed the existence of ghosts as mere fiction. Even as a kid, when I heard thumping in my bedroom in the middle of the night, I didn't cry for my mom or run out of the room. I went and investigated and found a mouse stuck in my bedroom's trash can, jumping to try and get out. I'm not usually afraid of much. Anyway, back when I was still married to my husband, we wanted to go to this place where you could mine your own sapphires, geology nerd. It was about a 4-hour drive away, and we figured we should just get a room somewhere overnight. I also had a pet parrot, and I didn't know anyone who had experience dealing with a large, potentially bitey bird, so I wanted to bring him with, as leaving him alone that long would be awful for him. My husband called around trying to find somewhere that could accommodate us and a very loud parrot, back before Airbnbs were really a thing. He managed to find a property with a bunch of cabins. They had one they only ever used for kids on school trips, but it was far away from the other cabins and said that we could bring the parrot if we stayed there. The cabin featured a long, spacious room filled with bunk beds, and although I would not be able to share a bed with my husband, I was just happy that we could bring my parrot. The cabin towered over a vast ravine. It was on a stilt-looking foundation and had a very long walkway to the front of the cabin. On either side of the walkway was a 10-foot drop. It was rustic. The bathroom was a separate little building outside, but it seemed nice enough. We set up our parrot and headed to the mine for a while and came back just as it was starting to get dark. My husband used to stay up much later than me, so he picked a bunk bed by the door and turned on his lamp to read. I put my parrot to bed in his cage at the other end of the room and slept in a bed in the middle part. I should mention, when I put my parrot to bed, I cover his cage with a blanket. But if he hears me or someone walk by his cage at night when he is covered, he will coo at you. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I thought I heard my husband walking in the cabin with his boots on, which I thought was weird. I sat up because I had to pee anyway and realized that my husband was asleep in the bed by the door with the light still on. I could see the entire inside of the cabin, and there was no one else in the room. But I could hear someone just walking from one end to the other clear as day, and every time the footsteps got near my parrot, he would coo because he could hear it too. I was terrified but too afraid to run over to my husband. I didn't know what else to do, so I covered my head with a pillow and covered my ears. Eventually I managed to fall asleep and convinced myself that I must have been hallucinating. The next morning my husband asked me if I noticed anything weird last night. I sheepishly told him the truth and that I must have dreamt it or hallucinated it. When I told him, he looked very uncomfortable. He told me shortly after I fell asleep he heard someone walking back and forth on the long walkway to the cabin. So finally he jumped up and opened the door right whenever the footsteps were in front of the door. He was pissed off and didn't have great judgment. He flung open the door, and there was no one there. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. As I said, there was a 10-foot drop into the brush below the walkway, and if someone jumped, you would have heard it, and they definitely would have hurt themselves. We both quickly packed up to leave. It's the only thing I've experienced that I have absolutely no rational explanation for, and I'm grateful that at least one person in the world genuinely believes me because he experienced it too. No one I've told the story to in the real world has ever believed me. But I know it happened, and it completely changed my beliefs on the paranormal. Possible ghost encounter. I was sleeping rough in a small town in the countryside. That particular night I was trying to sleep in a small outdoor corridor with a tin roof. It was raining heavily and was pretty cold. The noise of the rain on the roof was keeping me awake. After hours of lying there unable to sleep, I gave up and opened my eyes. As soon as I did so, I saw something white flapping in the wind out of the corner of my vision. I turned my head as a reaction to the movement. There was a woman standing in the rain right at the edge of the corridor. Her back was turned to me. She had long, black, dripping wet hair that reached down to the middle of her back. The strangest part, though, was what she was wearing, a pure, clean, white sleeveless dress that was made of hundreds of individual strips all flapping and blowing in the wind. It almost looked like they were growing from her skin. It was almost beautiful. The dress stopped at her knees, and I noticed she had bare feet. Her skin was pale white. She looked exactly like a ghost from a cliché horror movie. I stood up and grabbed my shoes, confused at this point, and crept out. I thought maybe I was in her spot and she was just crazy. I put my shoes on, not looking away from her. My curiosity was piqued, and I wanted to get her attention, so I stamped loudly on the ground a few times. She didn't turn around. The rain was still pouring down. After a few more seconds of staring at her, I lost my nerve and just walked away. To this day I wish I had shouted at her or said something to get her attention or even thrown my shoe at her, but I've seen too many horror movies. There's no telling how long she was standing there in the rain before I noticed her. It could have been hours. I've searched online for similar dresses and never found anything like it, so if it was a prank, they were incredibly committed. If I'm honest, I don't like telling the story because it always creeps me out again. A few days ago I was driving on a lonely stretch of two-lane highway where there's basically nothing for 50 miles. It was about a half hour after dusk. Pitch black, no lights other than my car's headlights. Other vehicles were few and far between. I came around a bend into a gentle descent and noticed the stopped tail lights of a car down the highway ahead of me. Given the time and location, I figured they must have hit a deer, coyote, or another animal, as that would be the most likely explanation for being stopped in the road. I was reaching for my phone, figuring I might have to call 911, and mentally locating where I'd packed the first aid kit in case they needed help when the car pulled forward and to the right, turning off the highway onto a side road, their tail lights disappearing into the brush. Okay, they probably just stopped for a moment on a deserted highway to figure out where they were going. 911 not needed, then. Phew. I didn't see their taillights after that, but it was a brushy area full of little hills, so that seemed okay. As I drove through the place they'd been stopped, I looked to the right to see the road they turned onto, and I did a double take. There was no side road. There was a solid metal guardrail running for quite a ways on both sides of the highway. No shoulder, nowhere to pull off to. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to drive back and look at it again, in case it were possible that I missed something, but I knew I hadn't. And I knew better than to drive back and investigate. So I just picked my jaw up off the floor and kept on going. I was recently discussing ghosts and sharing ghost stories with my best friend, and I remembered this strange experience I had during outdoor education camp in 6th grade. I realized I hadn't thought about it for many years and decided to write about it on here, because to this day I have no idea what I actually saw, and it still gives me the creeps. My best friend had also been there at the time, but I'd been too afraid to tell her about what I saw, in case I was just crazy. We are now both in our early 30s. It was 2001, and the whole 6th grade class, about 60 kids, at my school had a week-long camping field trip in some redwoods a couple hours from our school. It was supposed to be a celebration for finishing elementary school. Basically, it was a week of swimming, hiking, crafts, and adventure. It was great fun. On one of the last nights we were there, the camp aides took us on a night hike into the forest. There were about 5 to 10 camp counselors/teachers with flashlights, and the students got little glow sticks to hold. We first gathered in a large soccer field to get directions and organize our group. It was very dark, and we could see all the stars in the sky. We were surrounded by a thick, dark forest. As I marveled at the nature around me, I saw something white flitting about in my peripheral vision. I turned to see a strange, rapidly shifting white entity. It appeared to be glitching as it blinked in and out of existence. Sparks of energy seemed to illuminate the figure internally, despite the almost complete darkness outside. I rubbed my eyes and blinked, thinking that my eyes were adjusting to the dark and seeing floaters or ocular debris. I looked straight at it, expecting it to disappear, but it didn't. It actually seemed to become aware of me looking at it, as it moved back into the trees a little further when I continued to watch it move about. When I looked away, I could still see it in the corner of my eye start to come closer. It emerged from the perimeter of the forest. At first it looked like a humanoid, diaphanous figure, then it morphed into a wolf-like figure, running on all fours quickly. There was a good distance between me and this spirit, but I still was scared and felt sick to my stomach. I thought I was going crazy or something was wrong with my eyes. At the time, I didn't believe in ghosts and had only a couple of spooky encounters, like cabinets slamming shut randomly. Up until then, I always felt there was a logical explanation to everything. Anyway, we finally began our hike. My best friend was right next to me, but I told her nothing of this creepy-ass shifting transparent creature thing in the forest. I felt it was too risky to let her know about the creature, as she might not see it or think I was crazy. To my relief, we turned away from the side of the forest where the thing was and started to enter the forest on the opposite side. The trail was very steep. We hiked in a long line, with camp aides at the front, middle, and back of our group. I was somewhere in the middle. After 15 minutes or so of hiking, I remember feeling a prickling sensation down my spine, and my stomach churned. I glanced behind me, and that's when I saw the forest thing at the very back of the line, following us, or me. Although there were still a lot of kids in line separating me and the ghost, it was much closer than before, when I'd seen it in the woods by the field. It now had a distinctly humanoid form, although its edges seemed blurry and in still constant flux. It had no face, and if I stared at it directly, it would fade somewhat but not disappear. And like before, when looking at it peripherally, it became much more solid in form. I was scared shitless but still said nothing to anyone. I decided my eyes were still tricking me. Once we got to the top of our destination, it was time to turn around. I saw the figure still hanging around the end of the line. To my horror, the front of the line doubled back, forcing me to pass by the white figure. As soon as I got within 15-20 feet of the figure, it dissipated like steam or smoke right in front of me. I never saw it again. I didn't sleep that night in the open-air cabin and was very relieved that we were going home the next day. The great fear I experienced in the village at night, the odd news. I am a journalist living in Turkey. The story you're about to read didn't happen to me. The person who experienced the event sent it to me to publish. Mahir A. Male, recounts his childhood conflict with demons in the village, specifically an incident when they cornered him in the barn after he left his home to urinate. Now, I'm going to tell you about an event I had in my childhood. When I was a kid, just like every other kid, we used to be very curious about the demons. We tried every method we knew just to summon them so that we could see them. We even spent time in ruined places, sitting on onion skins and ashes. We had a friend called Hussein. He was familiar with some Arabic and knew how to perform spells. He used to recite prayers written on onion skins. Anyway, we were trying such things all the time. We used to hear things such as footsteps behind us when we were trying to summon demons. Voices were coming out from ruined walls. We used to cower in fear and run away. However, we continued to try the next day. In those times, we were going to primary school. We went to Erzurum together with my family in the summer. We used to spend our holidays in the villages, and they were wonderful days. In those years, the toilets used to be outdoors. That summer, 3 to 4 days after I arrived at the village, I woke up at 3:05 a.m. I had to pee, but I couldn't go to the toilet since it was outside, and I couldn't find enough courage. The next day, we played games and had fun with my friends. During the night, I woke up at exactly 3:05 a.m. Again, I had to pee. This time, I got up and woke my brother. He was mad but still agreed to come with me. Nothing happened that night since I was with my brother. However, I was scared anyway. I wondered why I always wake up at the same hour and minute every night. I woke up at the same hour and minute the next night. This time, I said to myself, I can go to the toilet quickly on my own. I swear I still feel fear whenever I remember the following things, which I'm going to tell right now. I went to the toilet and came back. I left the home's door open, only to find it closed upon my return. I was knocking on the door, but no one was answering. I went and knocked on the window. It was like people in the home were not hearing the knocks at all. I told myself, at least there is a small hut next to the barn, I can go there and sleep. I will wake up in the morning when my aunt comes to milk the cows, and I will go home. I got closer to the barn, where there was hay. I heard a voice from the small hut next to the barn. I stood still without moving and focused on the sound. Someone was laughing in the hut. I froze. I asked, "Who's there?" I took a step forward and started to hear a baby crying. In fear, I began to recite all the prayers I had previously learned. Meanwhile, the sound stopped. I thought about going back to the house. However, I feared that the same thing might happen again, and I reminded myself that I should not walk home alone at night. Instead, I planned to enter the barn next to it, say my prayers, and sleep there. I couldn't understand what kind of courage got to me at that moment. I think I found courage because the voices stopped when I said prayers. As I said prayers, I entered the barn. I made a bed for myself with the hay. Of course, the barn was a flimsy wooden structure with gaps between the boards. However, I was unable to think of anything else by saying prayers. Later, I laid down the hay and stayed like that for a while. Of course, I was unable to sleep because of fear. I wanted the morning to come as soon as possible. I was thinking the time would pass faster if I slept, but I was unable to sleep due to fear. About 15 minutes passed in this way. I was about to sleep, but I started hearing the knocks on the door of the barn. I opened my eyes. I thought someone entered the barn. I was able to see outside since there were gaps in the wood of the door. However, I couldn't see anyone in front of the barn. I noticed that someone is coming again. Thus, I started to say prayers. Then the sound stopped, and I was saying prayers without stopping due to fear. I wasn't able to leave there either. I wanted the morning to come as soon as possible because I knew that my aunt would come to the barn early in the morning. I was waiting for her. I stopped saying prayers 5 to 10 minutes later. I started to hear knocking voices on the door again. I started to say prayers again. When the sound stopped, I wanted to get out of the barn and return home while saying prayers. I opened the door and started to run to my aunt. I was running really fast, which I cannot describe right now. I felt that someone was chasing me while I was running. I could hear footsteps on the stones behind me. I yelled a lot when I arrived home, and finally, my parents woke up. Then the thing behind me disappeared. I told my parents what happened. The next day, they took me to the Hoja in the village. The Hoja said prayers and prepared a protective amulet. I'm truly thankful for that, Hoja. I have not experienced such incidents again since I started wearing that amulet. It has been more than 10 years since the event, and I still cannot forget it. All trees and silence. I live in the mountains of Northern California. I regularly go hiking up in the forest and mountains. There are many things I have seen and felt throughout the years that I cannot explain while hiking alone. I will share a couple of these stories. This is one of the 3 times I have experienced absolute silence in a forest. About 6 years ago I was in the high school's outdoor club. Our teacher wanted to take a group of students to Robert Louis Stevenson State Park to hike the Palisade Trail. Most of the club were seniors, and they decided to blow off the hike, so it was just the teacher, her friend, my friend, and me who went hiking. We arrived at the head of the trail by Highway 29 and began to hike. The day before the hike there was a storm, so there was water flowing through the creeks and brooks, making the area slippery. We arrived at Table Mountain and admired the beautiful views of Napa Valley. We continued hiking on a little trail for about 5 miles when we found a fire trail. At this point my teacher's friend had to slow down from slipping on a rock, and my friend wanted to take pictures of the surroundings. I decided to hike ahead by myself. I ended up about 2 miles ahead of the group when I started to hike down when I reached an area of tall trees that blocked out the sun. I slowed down to admire the beauty. I suddenly noticed the birds stopped singing and there was no wind. The trees looked perfectly still without any noise in the area. That is when it seemed like time stood still. I began to feel a large burst of fear and began to panic. I began to run downhill, slipping on the rocks and still not hearing any sounds. I must have run about a mile when I noticed the sun was bright, the wind was blowing, and the sound of the forest returned. I began to slow down again. I looked back at the tall trees that I exited out of. I began to feel relief and continued hiking down about half a mile to the bottom end of the trail. I had 30 minutes to reflect on what happened before my group arrived. I decided not to mention the experience to them, but I did ask them if they noticed the tall trees. They did not. To this day I still hike with my friend up mountains and forests, but I have never spoken to my friend about this experience or others. I live in New York. Recently I went upstate to the Catskill Mountains with my girlfriend, her younger brother, and her mother. They own land there, and my girlfriend's father built a cabin there. I went there on July 9th and got back to the city on July 12th. I stayed in the mountains for 3 nights. While I was there, nothing unusual happened at all until the last night. We swam in a lake nearby. Funny enough, it was called Crystal Lake. We also cooked a lot of food and overall just had a nice time. One night I did vomit after swimming, however, other than that, nothing strange happened at all. Until the 3rd night. To give some backstory, the cabin is great. It has bedrooms and all that, a kitchen, and even a ping pong table. However, it doesn't have a shower or bathroom. You pee in the woods, poop in a bucket, and shower with the outdoor shower they have. The outdoor shower is pretty much a shower head on a huge metal container. You can adjust the temperature with a dial. It has wooden walls surrounding it for privacy, however, the side on the left is completely open to the forest. You stand on a wet rock and shower. This was my first time showering outdoors ever, and I really enjoyed it. At times I would just stand under the water and look out into the forest. Every time I showered, it was after 10 p.m., so it was very dark. The only light I had was a lantern and my iPhone flashlight if I decided to use it, however, there was no need for it since the lantern was pretty strong. Anyways, on the 3rd night, knowing it'd be my last time showering outside for a while, I decided to shower pretty late. My girlfriend was asleep, and so were her brother and mom. I checked my phone before going to shower, and it was around 2:13 a.m. I walked to the shower, trying to open the door quietly so that I don't wake anyone up. Eventually I get there and start showering. I realized midway I forgot to bring my shampoo, so I decided I'd do what I always did, just stare out at the forest. It was beautiful, and even though it was dark, the lantern lit up most of my surroundings. After about, I'd say, 15 minutes of staring out at the forest, I started to become uncomfortable. This discomfort wasn't due to the water's temperature or any other factor. The discomfort was solely physical. I felt as if I were experiencing the same sensation I have when I turn off my hallway light and then run upstairs in complete darkness. The incident hadn't happened to me at all. All the showers I took, I never once felt this way. I tried ignoring it, but eventually it became too much. As I went to turn off the shower, the feeling completely went away. I decided I'd stay in the shower. When I looked back at the forest, I noticed a patch of moss on the tree closest to me. I hadn't noticed it before, which was odd because it was the tree closest to me. Even though it was the tree closest to me, I still cannot see it properly, though, because I can't get the lantern wet. The lantern stays at the entrance of the shower stall area, so the tree is still pretty much in the dark. I focused more on the tree until my eyes got irritated from the water constantly hitting them. I rubbed my eyes, and just as I lowered my hands from my face, I saw a figure walking away from the area in front of the tree. The figure was dark, like a shadow, except it had the moss from the tree all over it. No facial features or anything. The darkness likely contributed to its appearance. When this happened, I walked backwards and turned around to get my clothes and run away. When I turned around I slipped on a patch of grass and hit my back against the rock I showered on. I felt lightheaded but fine. I got up, gathered my things, and speed walked back to the cabin. The next morning as we were packing to leave, I hadn't told anybody about what I had seen or experienced. My back didn't have any bruises, and I had no scrapes or anything, so I thought it was a dream until my girlfriend told me I woke her up a bit when I got back in bed last night. I still didn't tell anybody what I saw. Before we left, I told my girlfriend I had left a sock near the shower area. I told her I must have dropped it on the way back and that I needed to get it. I went back to the shower and looked at the tree. There was no moss on it at all. The bark of the tree was completely brown. The tree had only a few gray sections and not a single green speck. I literally said out loud, "Wow." I gazed at the tree. And that's it. I went home. Nothing crazy has happened since. There have been no unusual occurrences or interactions. Life has returned to its usual routine. 1980. I was 19. A friend and I decided to go camping in the Ozark National Forest. We borrowed his dad's 4x4 and loaded up some sleeping bags. We also took a .22 rifle and his German Shepherd dog. Our plan was to drive as far as we could into the backcountry on dirt roads and camp just off the road right before sunset. We drove for many miles and did not see a soul. It started getting a little dark, so we were looking for pull-offs to camp. We rounded a corner, and in a clearing was a massive biker party. Kegs of beer, tents, bikes, and trucks. Also lots of badass-looking dudes. On the side of the road they had spray-painted a piece of plywood that read "The Village of Pillage." This completely freaked us out, and it seemed like the whole crowd turned and gave us hard looks. We drove for another 2 or 3 miles and pulled off about 50 yards up a hill overlooking the road and lit a lantern. We were debating whether to make camp here or go even further to put more space between us and the village. About that time we heard a vehicle coming from the direction of the party. We shut the lantern off and watched its headlights slowly drive by us. We decided to stay put for a while where we were with our lights off. About 5 minutes later, we hear a vehicle going very slow heading back towards us. We then realize the vehicle had turned its headlights off. It stops on the road by the turnout, and we hear vehicle doors open and close quietly. Next we hear footsteps heading our way. We are now lying behind a log, aiming the .22 in the dark, deciding if we should fire warning shots or what exactly we should do. My friend's dog starts growling, and he yells, "Sick him, Bucky." The dog bounds down the hill, growling and barking. The dog was raising hell. We hear people running, the car starts, and away they go towards the village. We immediately jump in the truck and drive in the opposite direction as fast as possible on the dirt roads, taking multiple turns and becoming very lost. Eventually we hit a paved road and head home. True story, that dog saved somebody from getting shot. We were just scared teenagers, and it was freaking us out. What kind of people would try to sneak up on us in the dark in the middle of nowhere? In 2009, my family went out to get a Christmas tree. We were about 20 to 30 miles away from home, way out in the middle of nowhere. This road we were on is fairly regularly traveled by people with jeeps and such because the mud is really soft, even when there is snow. Something to do with the chemical makeup of the rock, or something. That's important. So anyway, this road is on top of a ridge when we find a suitable tree and stop to cut it. Recently, we had watched a documentary on Bigfoot that had kind of freaked my siblings and me out, so my younger brother keeps asking if Sasquatch is in this part of the forest. We keep telling him that Sasquatch isn't real and not to worry, but his insistence was starting to creep my sister and me out. We got the tree on the ground, pictures taken, and my dad is cleaning up some branches from the bottom when my mom gets the great idea to throw a rock into the woods right next to the car. For those that don't know, this is common Sasquatch behavior, so my brother is really getting worried. After several rocks, my mom was done throwing things when, out of nowhere, a decent-sized tree branch landed on the roof of the car. This branch was bigger around than our tree, which was a problem because our tree was among the biggest and tallest in that area. At the time I brushed it off as my dad being silly, since I didn't hear him sawing anymore. We pulled the branch off the car, and I went to take a leak while my dad tied everything down. I walked down the hill about 10 feet until I found a suitable bush, but on the way down, something got spooked from around that spot and took off to my right. I figured I'd come across a deer or something, so I went down to where it had been to look for tracks so I could identify the animal. I got down there and couldn't find much except some trampled grass and broken branches where the animal had busted through the underbrush. The grass was pretty thick, so I wasn't too upset by not being able to find anything. I returned to my chosen bush, did my thing, but as I was trying to climb back up the side where I had come down, I slipped because of the mud. I'm used to that happening, as it is a common phenomenon around here, but I was slightly miffed at having to walk along the side of this ridge on the north face in December. It was about 20 degrees, threatening snow, and about a 15-mile-an-hour wind. I'd left my coat up top, Since I hadn't expected to be down there that long, the mountain blocked the wind so that on top it was closer to 45 degrees. As I'm walking along the side of this hill to where it got a little brushier, my mom yelled down, "Quit throwing rocks. You've hit my window twice." I yelled back that I wasn't throwing any rocks and kept going, thinking that my sister was just being silly and carrying on with the Bigfoot thing. As I was reaching the patch of brush that I was going to climb, I came across what looked like a human footprint, but without shoes in the mud. It was about 14 inches long and had hair imprinted in it. At first I thought it was a bear, but the bears around here don't get much more than 150 to 200 pounds, and even a big one only has 7-inch feet. As I was examining this track, I heard something fly over me. I looked up in time to see a branch landing at the top of the hill, which is only a little way up now. I then looked in the direction it came from just as something was retreating down the hill in the brush. Although I never saw the creature, I could tell it was big, and I set a new world record for the highest standing jump by reaching the top of that hill in mere picoseconds. I got back to the car totally out of breath despite it only being 20 yards away and hopped in. My dad was just getting in as I ran up, and everyone else was already up. They asked me what was wrong, and I said, "I don't know, but something down there is throwing things at us. Let's go." My parents looked at each other, and for once there is always a real explanation, so let's go find it. Father didn't hesitate to leave. This is what made me a believer in Sasquatch. About 2 miles down this road, we were driving at about 25 miles per hour when a truck came speeding up behind us and refused to back off. We pulled over in a wide spot, but instead of passing, the truck pulled next to us, and that driver rolled down the window. It turned out to be a guy we knew, who was a logger from the time he was 15. He spent his whole life in the woods and always denied the existence of a Bigfoot. But when he stopped next to us, he was terrified, and he said, "Get your ass in gear and scoot. I just saw a Bigfoot." We followed him to the main road, where we stopped and asked him where he'd seen this Bigfoot. He said that someone had been cutting up a tree there, probably for Christmas, and that the thing had been standing on the side of the road. This story came from my father's close friend who lives in Cherokee, North Carolina, Western NC. This area is extremely remote and mountainous. There is something there that dates back hundreds of years called the Brown Mountain Lights. Apparently, at night if you look across the mountains, you can sometimes see brilliant lights in random places, lighting up an entire valley across the mountains, lasting from a few seconds to a few minutes and then pitch black again. And these lights are attributed to UFO activity that the government is not only aware of but also actively assists in these proceedings. Whatever they may be, I have never seen them nor do I intend ever looking for them. Regardless of what you believe, the fact of the matter is that, over a long period of time, several people have gone missing in this one area and have never been found. Back to the story, my father's friend was hiking in these mountains during fall in 2002 when he happened upon an old, blocked-off logging road and decided to check it out. After a couple of hours, he was rounding a bend and was approached by 2 men in their early mid-30s. Both of them were wearing jeans and t-shirts and were heavily armed with M16/AR-15 rifles with sidearms and body armor with a lot of ammunition and gear on them. He said only one talked and said, "Sir, you need to leave this area." Obviously he immediately turned around and left, but right behind them, he said there was a small, house-sized, plain metal building, like someone would build for their garage beside a house. He left and has never been back to that area and has never had a similar circumstance since. I don't know if I am to believe him or not, but I do know he spoke calmly about the occurrence and did not smile once, and also that my father has known him for many years and trusts him. I don't know if it's true, but there's the story I was told. Make of it what you will, and if you are wanting more information, Google the Brown Mountain Lights of North Carolina. This last weekend we were camping at a dispersed campsite in central Colorado. Right at dusk, our 2 dogs, a corgi and a Pyrenees, started flipping out and barking/growling on the road to our northeast. We assume it is merely a person walking down a trail next to the river that runs alongside the road, so we command our dogs to be quiet. However, they ignore our commands and remain very agitated as their attention shifts from the road to the dense aspen forest to our north, then northwest, and finally west. Whatever they are upset about is circling our camp. I tell my wife to silence our 5-year-old son, who doesn't realize that something is happening, and then my wife tells me she heard a dog noise. Not from ours. With this news, I didn't hear it. I was trying to tell my son to STFU. I reached down and snapped the leash on my corgi, as it was the most likely to flee in fear or become prey. My wife nods at me in approval, and I stand up and start scanning the forest up the mountain in the southwesterly direction my Pyrenees is now focused on. It only took me a few moments to catch some motion. It's big and pretty tall, so my brain immediately thinks it's just a deer, so I point at it and say deer and then instantly realize I was wrong as it turns and looks at me. While my brain is struggling to comprehend what this large gray animal is, my wife lets out a cry, "Wolf." And my brain's pattern recognition system clicks in, and I see a massive dog standing on a rock about 200 feet away looking right at my Pyrenees, unleashed, to my side. I reach down and grab my 357 out of the pocket on my folding chair and start to run right to the point I saw it as quickly as I could. My Pyrenean beats me there by a large margin. He finds the scent and starts to follow it, so I command him to stop before something jumps out at him before I can get up there. He complies and waits for me. When I get up there, I am worried about his safety, so I tell him to retreat to camp. He complies and picks up the wolf's tracks, heading back to the road, and follows them back to my wife and son, who are calling him back after hearing my desperate commands to make him stop his pursuit. I find a set of tracks that are not for my dog but are the same general size as my 110 pounds Pyrenees' prints. Heading away from camp, it was a pretty easy tracking exercise, as the creature was running from camp at full blast and leaving a very easy path to follow. I tracked it about 1/4 mile from camp, and the tracks turned from an obvious run to a slow walk. I then lost the tracks within pretty short order, so I climbed a little higher to a nice rubble field and listened and waited. Dead silent. Feeling satisfied that it was far enough from camp, I turned back and followed the route I took, following the tracks in reverse all the way back to the road, keeping one eye over my shoulder. When I got back to camp, the forest came back alive with its normal sounds of birds. Only then did my wife and I realize how silent it had become over this encounter. Then, within 2 to 3 minutes, a deer walked through camp without my dogs even taking notice. Just a few months ago I was reading an article about how they have several confirmed sightings of gray wolves in Colorado and are expecting their return. I never thought I would see one, and it was definitely not a pure coyote, as tall and big as it was. I hunt coyotes and am quite familiar with their size, behavior, and appearance. If it was part coyote, it was a massive hybrid and the biggest one I have ever laid eyes on. The entire situation terrified my son, making it impossible to put him down and enjoy some quality adult time after dark. He was not going to be left alone in the tent. This happened in Boulder, Utah. It was spring roundup. Grandpa, Dad, and a couple of uncles were gathering the last of the cattle on the winter range. We kids had school the next day, so we were dropped off at Grandpa's so we could catch the school bus at the neighbor's house down the road. I was only 13 or so, my 2 cousins were close to my age, and my brother was 4 years my junior. We were happy because we had no adult supervision until we got on the bus the next morning. We were going to sleep in a camp trailer in the driveway. Grandpa had only taken 2 of his 5 cow dogs, so we were trying to get the others to sleep with us. These are tough ranch dogs, 2 Cataulas and a blue heeler. We couldn't get them to settle down, so we finally put them outside so we could get some sleep. We were almost asleep when something hit the trailer hard, followed by furious barking and snarling from the dogs. For the next hour something fought with the dogs and beat the S and %T out of the trailer. The sounds were like a pig, fox, and horse all mixed up. I've not heard anything like it since. We were terrified, all the guns were in the house, and all we had was a few dull steak knives. Long story short, it finally left around midnight. The next morning, the first thing we did was look for tracks. However, it had rained after we fell asleep, so we found no joy in our search. The adults thought we were just making it up to scare ourselves, but it wasn't like that at all. Later on, my dad's GF told me something very similar happened to her under pretty much the same circumstances, but she never told anyone. The ground was frozen, so no tracks for her either. No tracks, no injuries to the dogs, no proof. I've thought about it a lot, and it's a complete mystery to me still. Cult activity. It was some years ago when good friends of mine suggested we take some time off to chill in the outdoors. We are all active and wanted to just relax before our next assignment. Cappy had found a nice place we could stay in the mountains away from the daily grind. Cappy said it was a cabin on a lake. Looking at the pictures, it seemed quite idyllic. We all packed up and met at Cappy's place, ready to go. Cappy had an RV, being a real outdoor enthusiast. We brought some booze along with everything else. Mary was the one woman among all of us guys and is very popular. We packed our bags and started the long drive. Mary said it'd probably take the better part of a day to get there. We listened to rock and roll and would occasionally take some shots to start relaxing. By nightfall we finally arrived. As depicted by the pictures, there was the lone cabin located right beside the lake. Here we were all alone right in the heart of nature. It took a while to unload everything and bring it all inside. There was a full moon, and the view of the lake was intense. There was no electricity but plenty of lamps to light things up, so no big deal. As we were bringing in the last of our items, Mary told us to come take a look. Over by the side of the cabin were several deep troughs freshly dug up. Also, I noticed what looked like strange runes carved into the ground beside them. It seemed really weird, but we were all quite tired and ready for some much needed shut-eye. There was a separate room for each of us. Everyone was ready to crash. I wanted to sit on the porch and watch the stars. The rest of the crew said good night and went to bed. I was having a hard time keeping my eyes open as I sat there, then suddenly I heard a voice off to the side of the cabin. Help me, please. It was the voice of a young woman, and she sounded like she was in pain. What the heck, I thought. The tiredness left my body as I went inside and grabbed a pistol. I could hear snoring coming from some of the closed bedrooms. Stepping back outside onto the porch, I said, "What here?" All was silent now except for the waves splashing against the shore. I then heard the voice again. It sounded like it was coming from beside the RV now. "Are you all right?" I said as I pulled back the hammer. I got up, switched on my flashlight, and cast the light towards the vehicle. "Help me, please," I heard again. The voice sounded even more painful. I realized whoever was there had moved quite a distance in a short period of time. There came the sound of someone from off to the side of the cabin stepping around in the bushes, then something rushed straight towards me from the RV. Clicking the on-off button of the flashlight made it pulse, and I could see a large figure headed towards the porch. I fired several rounds straight ahead. A high-pitched scream erupted, prompting the creature to turn aside and stagger away. Turning to the side, I fired a few more rounds. From inside the cabin I could hear the crew. Cappy ran outside first, followed by Mary and the rest. Some of them had their guns. I explained what had happened as they all listened intently. Cappy stepped off the porch towards his RV. Man, was he pissed off. Some clouds had passed overhead, and it was pitch black now. Cappy walked around his RV cursing the whole time. Then, with a curse in his voice, he admonished anyone present to leave immediately if they knew what was in their best interests. He came back to the porch, and we decided who would keep watch until daylight. Cecil and Alex volunteered. When morning came, we all went back outside. Something had been scratching the back of the RV, which drew the ire of Cappy. There were large footsteps leading off into the woods, and it looked like there was some dried blood upon the ground. We went inside and made breakfast. As we were eating, we heard a vehicle outside coming up the driveway. Cappy and I went back out to see who it was. A police car pulled up to the cabin, then an officer stepped out. He was quite tall and skinny and had long, stringy hair falling from under his cap, and as we got closer, he smelled really bad. "So what's going on?" he said. We said nothing. "There was a call regarding some suspicious activity," said the cop. Cappy started laughing as the rest of the crew all came outside. I could tell the policeman seemed shocked to see so many people. "There's no one within at least 25 miles of this place," Cappy said as he frowned. "What's your name and badge number?" The policeman didn't answer. "You smell like fresh shit," Mary said. "Don't you all even bathe around here?" "Well, okay," said the cop. "False alarm." He started to head back to his car. Cappy replied, "I asked you a question." We all started to leave the porch, surrounding him. Cappy went around him to the open door and looked inside the vehicle. "No radio? What the duck is going on? Get out of here immediately, you disgusting creature," Cappy told him. The cop got in his car and turned the ignition. Cappy looked at me and Mary. "Follow him, you know what to do." Cappy kept a couple of motocross bikes strapped to the rear end of his RV. Mary and I walked beside the cop car as it began to back out. I knocked on the passenger side window, staring at him while Mary unhooked the bikes. He wouldn't make eye contact as I continued to rap hard against the glass. "Where are you going?" I shouted. He must have pressed down on the gas pedal, causing the car to accelerate. The sound of the cylinders knocking could be heard. The car reached the road, and the driver began to wheel it around. Mary had the bikes down, and we both mounted them. I watched the car as it started to accelerate. The bikes roared as we followed hot behind in pursuit. I had a long chain and raced to the passenger side of the car. He looked at me as I slung the chain against the windshield. It cracked on first impact, and the driver must have panicked, steering into a deep ditch. The car crashed, flipped over, and collided with some trees. Mary and I pulled up and waited. Finally the driver's side door opened and the cop began to pull himself out. He was bleeding profusely from a deep gash across his forehead, and his cheap sunglasses were missing. "Stop," said Mary. "You're not going anywhere until you tell us who called." He still smelled so bad as he struggled to free himself. "Don't you listen?" I said. She told you to stop. He began to sob. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched him. Tell us who called, and you can go. Mary reached down, grabbing him by the hair, and started to yank hard. We know you're not police, you filthy liar, she said. You're not so tough, are you now? Mary pulled out a big tuft of long, greasy hair by the roots as he screamed. I listened to the wheels spinning in place as he continued to cry. Oh well, said Mary as she wiped the palm of her hand against her jeans. This was a terribly unfortunate beginning to what was meant to be a much-needed vacation. Mary and I had returned just in time for some breakfast, and then some of us went out to the lake to take a look around. The weather was perfect now, and the earlier tension finally started to ease. We brought out some lawn chairs and set them up beside the shore. Before long I fell into a deep sleep, and when I awoke it was close to nightfall. There was a shallow pit beside the cabin, and some of the crew had placed a lot of kindling inside it. Mary lit it up as the sun began to set, and we passed a bottle around. One war story led to another as the evening quickly passed. I had a good buzz now. As Mary was telling a story I'd heard many times before, there came the voice I had heard the previous evening. Help me, please. Again it was the voice of a young woman. Cappy pointed to his nose. A gentle breeze was coming off the lake, and I grimaced as I smelled the sudden, recognizable stench. The odor was strong and smelled just like the cop. Hey, honey, where are you? Said Cappy as he lifted up his Mossberg and pumped around into the chamber. All was silent for a moment, then we heard sobbing. We all sat still and listened. Whatever it was grew quiet. I could hear something dragging itself through the grass, starting to move away from us. Cappy was the first to get up, and we all followed suit. Several of us turned on our flashlights and ran the beams over the ground. Something quite large and low to the ground was creeping along away from us. We circled, and then suddenly it reared up. It was huge and screamed a blood-curdling cry. At first the horned beast charged straight at us, only to be met with concentrated firepower. Every shot struck home. Help, help, shouted Cappy as he laughed. It crashed into the trees and fled. We ran up to the woods, all firing our weapons. I heard something crash into the trees as we continued to shoot. Cappy was the first to enter the woods, and we all followed. The next morning we decided to leave. Cappy said he would be contacting the person who had rented us the cabin. He didn't sound pleasant at all. The figure in the corner. When I was younger, I went on a trip with my elementary school to a well-known camp. I didn't have many friends, so I ended up being placed in a cabin with other kids I didn't know well. It was nearly summertime in Georgia, hot and humid during the day but surprisingly cold at night. We spent most of our time outdoors, doing typical camp activities like canoeing, roasting s'mores, and hiking. We had the opportunity to embark on a night hike one evening. Oddly enough, my cabin's room was the only group interested, so we set off with a couple of teachers. We learned halfway through the hike that we were traversing a slave burial ground. Were all those flat stones we had been stepping on? They weren't random, they were headstones. We were just kids, and hearing the news terrified us. I had always been fascinated by scary stories and the macabre, but this was too much for little me. Some of the girls became visibly uncomfortable and asked if we could turn back. Unfortunately, the teachers told us it would take twice as long to retrace our steps, so we had no choice but to keep moving forward. When we finally got back to our cabin, the mood was tense. Some of the girls were still spooked and asked if we could share bunks or at least leave the lights on. The teachers declined, citing camp rules, so we settled into our separate bunks. I was in a top bunk on the far wall. After settling everyone, the teachers entered, switched off the lights, and abandoned us to the darkness. About 10 minutes later, one of the girls screamed. I jolted awake and turned toward the sound. That's when I saw it, a tall, dark figure standing in the corner of the room. It was so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. Its eyes glowed a fiery red-orange, and it seemed to be wearing a hat. I stared at it, frozen in disbelief. Around me, the other girls began screaming and crying, clearly seeing the same thing I did. The teachers rushed back in as the first girl who saw it bolted out of the room in sheer panic. She hysterically described the figure to them, confirming what the rest of us had seen. The teachers quickly ushered us out of the room so they could investigate. They found nothing, no shadow, no strange objects, no signs of anyone or anything being there. The girl who had screamed first refused to go back into the room. She was so upset they had to call her mother to come and pick her up that night. When the rest of us eventually returned to the cabin and the lights were turned off again, the corner was empty. The figure had vanished. In fact, the corner was unusually bright, almost as if nothing had ever been there. Even now, years later, I remember that night vividly. The other girls and I all agree on what we saw. I saw a little boy outside my window one night. As the title says, I saw a little boy outside my window one night. A little backstory, this was several years ago. I was living with my family in a sort of beaten down house. At the time, my mom's boyfriend was really going through what do you call it? It was sort of just like a psychotic episode. When he doesn't have anything to smoke, he kind of gets crazy and starts talking about demons, ghosts, God, etc. Around that time, he had been talking crazy, saying there was a demon in the house and it was trying to get in him or whatever. Anyways, I told you that so you can kind of tell just how terrified I was at the time. I was in the living room, watching TV, my mom was at work at the time. Long story short, I fell asleep on the couch, which is beside the big window in the living room. The house was very run down, and we had blinds up over the windows, but the part of the window my head was by was uncovered because of the AC. It was around 2 to 3 a.m. when I woke up. I opened my eyes and was kind of lost, as most people are after just waking up, and I looked out the window to try and get a sense of the time. He was just there. Just standing there looking up through the window. He had on baseball attire, and he was ashen. I'll never forget his eyes. They were hollow almost, like I can't exactly explain it, but they were like soulless, but like they weren't. Like, he didn't look like he had any thoughts, but he looked so sad at the same time. I was just completely paralyzed, I couldn't move. I was beyond terrified. I kept just staring at him, and he just kept staring at me. My mom's boyfriend had come into the room and almost whispered to me, "You see him too?" I'd never been so scared in my entire life, I still haven't. My mom's boyfriend came up to the window, pulled up the blinds, and started talking to the little boy. After a little bit, I remember seeing the boy walk away, and then I looked away, and he was just gone. I mentioned it before, after we left that house, but my mom's boyfriend denied that it ever happened. I just feel kind of silly about it. Maybe it was just a vivid dream? Since her boyfriend had been talking crazy the whole week? I don't know, though, it felt too real, and I can still see the little boy inside my head. The old man in the yard. When I was 8, we moved into a new house in a new state. School was 2 months away, and with no friends, I spent that summer exploring my new, huge yard that had one very flat section half the size of a football field and an enormous old tree that I was eyeing for climbing. One day early on I found a pair of dentures in the dirt under the tree. I was 8, so they went in my pocket. That's when the old man, we shall call him Tom, started waving at me. I would see Tom in the yard walking around. He always wore a slightly faded Hawaiian button-down shirt and outdoor sandals paired with shorts. He had gray hair, glasses, and a close-mouthed smile that was very friendly. Before anyone says this is weird, this was a tiny town in the country 25 years ago. Yards were large but connected mostly without fences. It wasn't unusual to see people walking around. And it felt safe. I saw him for years. Once, when I was 11, I was outside with my dad and saw Tom near one of the barns in the orchard, so I waved. My dad asked me who I was waving at, and so I pointed at Tom and said, "Him." I don't have to tell you guys that my dad didn't see anyone, right? That was when I realized something was amiss with Tom. I didn't mention him to anyone again. Until one day, after I had mowed our elderly neighbor's yard for them, I received an invitation to their house. While sipping a lemonade and looking at the pictures they had all over their house, I saw someone familiar. He was younger in the photo, but it was Tom. "I know him," I said, pointing, forgetting my personal rule. They exchanged an amused look. "Yep. Tom used to live in our house. The original owner was best friends with the couple next door and the gardener. The huge flat piece of the yard by the huge old tree used to be an enormous garden. He retired and spent his days gardening and napping in a chair under the tree. It was his happy place. One day he lay back in his chair and fell asleep, never to wake up. Not a bad way to go if you ask me. Tom wore dentures and had lost a set at one point. When I was around 14, I tossed the dentures and stopped seeing Tom. But I still think about him often. I don't know if you all want to hear a loony Sasquatch encounter, but I've got one for you. Very long, this is more than just a Sasquatch paranormality. This was years ago, admittedly during COVID. I stayed in Phoenix by myself and have a homie who lived out in the boondocks outside of Sacramento, California. So sometime during the summer of 2021, later into the season, I flew out there so we could search for Sasquatch. Going into this, I assumed a few things. 1. These things are intelligent, and I'm probably not going to just walk up on them. 2. I believe Les Stroud and a few other witnesses who proclaimed telepathic communication with them, an almost psychic awareness of the forest, could explain why they are so good at hiding and why public acceptance is scrutinized. They are mirrors to what we are capable of as animals. 3. If I'm polite and have pure intentions, they may reveal themselves to me. 4. The mountains outside of Sacktown are a good place to start. 5. I brought some paper with funny chemicals so that a couple of days into camping, I could try tripping and maybe connect in the realm of psychic awareness. No psychedelics were consumed during the experience, but I did intend to. I'm leaving this point because psychedelic use isn't a barrier for determining someone's truthfulness. This point is not to deny the potential for mental breaks, however, life is what it is. If you're still with me, the story doesn't get that much more loony, but you're going to need to suspend disbelief in respect to some things if you don't believe anything I just said. The homie and I packed the van from the 90s, and we're off. The weather was forecast as clear as can be, and at the time there was a fire restriction. You have to know this isn't our first rodeo in the realm of WTF, and both of us are generally very rational in our approach to life, just sometimes the paranormal happens. Thank God for homies that are witnesses alongside us, because sometimes it can be so wild you go a little crazy. Anyway, off we go, driving and driving for a while. I couldn't tell you how long, you can just drive out there. We pulled off to the side of the main road eventually and found a dirt road that drove around a hill, and there we parked the whip. Hiking a bit into the forest, we set up our hammocks for the stay. We brought a bunch of shiny things and fruits as offerings, figuring if they are psychic, they are going to know we're there, and so the quest is to get them to come to you if you don't have too much time. We hiked a bit, set up the offerings on the top of the nearest mountain hill, and whacked a few trees with some logs, performing the signature wood thump Sasquatch has been known for. Waiting for a response, we got nothing but an echo. That's cool. It's not like you drive up, make some noises, and the squatches are going to be like, welcome to the forest. Even though that's what I secretly wanted, now you have to understand, the forest is alive, awake, and aware. I already knew this, superficially. It knew my intentions and how naive we were and are. We ended up just chilling at the camp, bullshitting, smoking a joint, and enjoying the sounds of the woods. I figured maybe this night would be the one for just getting our base figured out, and the night for the funny papers would be the next night so we're not bugging. So no funny psychic chemicals needed this night. We did smoke a joint, but we were proper stoners. A single joint was us being serious and sober. After a bit I was like, yo, let's get organized. If a black bear pulls up, we have to scram, and I don't want my stuff ruined. My friend agreed, and so we packed up the stuff we brought so it was all simple if we needed to dip 500. Back to chilling we went. Forest life abuzz. You know when you're out in the middle of nowhere like that, it gets dark fast. The comfort of the forest turned weird. I've camped in isolation before. I know the weirdness of being by yourself in the middle of nowhere, even while smoking weed. This was worse. So I decided what was wrong was we had no fire. The homie was not about it, though. He said the forest was weird for him too, but he was telling me how there is a fire restriction and he's not paying any fines. And I'm like, nah, gang, I'll pay the fines blah blah blah, we just have to clear like 10 feet around, dig a pit, and start a small fire at the bottom, and I'll put it out, I just don't feel right. And he's like, alright run it. I know, irresponsible, but ooga booga fire, I don't know what to tell you all. We do all this, I get some kindling, and I'm ready for my inner shaman to channel the spirits of my ancestry. Except, by the power of? This perfectly dry kindling refused to light with a lighter. I wasn't even smacking stones or anything. Just regular modern shamanic fire starting, with a Bic lighter. Couldn't believe it, swear to God. At the time the campsite was lit up by electric lanterns and headlamps. So in my infinite guru wisdom, I realized the answer to nonsensical problems is nonsensical solutions. Turn off all the lights. To start a fire, it must be dark, I said with the confidence of a third-generation witch doctor. The answer to a nonsensical problem is a nonsensical solution. And the camp plunged into darkness. With a crackle and a wisp, flames caught the kindling on fire, all cliché-like. Bic shamanism was a success. It was too big of an initial whoosh for how much actual kindling there was, but I digress. Me and the homie looked at each other like, WTF? And he burst into laughter because this was more of that weird paranormal stuff that you just have to be there for. The fire died down a bit and was pretty small, like maybe the size to cook one hot dog, maybe. But it was enough. The weird feeling of being in the forest by ourselves was gone. But I've been camping sans fire, so for this moment it was weird. Trust me, I wouldn't usually be setting fires during fire season. After not even 5 minutes of sitting there in that chill, Fire-cracking silence. The homie looked up, and things just got weirder from here. Put out the fire, there's a car coming along the way, he said, and I looked up, and this is what I saw. A blue car, almost like an old Beetle. It was driving from our right, going left. We shouldn't have been visible, as this was a section of road that was down a ways, but from there it was a little valley, and then the road pulled up around the hill, going past us about 200 feet away. We drove far into the middle of nowhere, so we were surprised to see a car show up at 10 p.m. And the car never shows up. Like a ghost car, it didn't drive back up after it went down. Nothing. We sat for 20 minutes staring at this place in the road. No car. Like right when we lost sight, it vanished. No bullshit, we sat there, still chilling. Ghost car, huh? Yup. After a small amount of time, once we realized there was no car anywhere, it started drizzling. Water droplets from the sky of a forest that just got started, out of nowhere. Typing this up, I believe this is some bad no-sleep fanfic. Lucky for us, we had already packed up some of our stuff, so it was just grabbing the hammocks and bags and making it to the van. From there it poured for 20 minutes straight, a microburst of rain when just a few hours earlier there was not a cloud in the sky. I don't even remember seeing clouds show up in the sky as I was busy worrying about the blue ghost car pulling up with a fine for my tiny fire. Sometime during the shower my friend fell asleep. I don't know how, but this dude falls asleep early all the time, no problem. It's crazy. This might be the most unbelievable part. The fact that he can fall asleep so quickly and early in the night is astounding. I'm sitting there, waiting. I'm convinced at this point that Sasquatch is about to jump onto the roof of the van to get me to shit my pants or something. It was the only logical conclusion at the time for the progression of the night. I'm looking into the woods, nothing. And then it hit me. It attracted my mind like a magnet. It felt as if the reality tunnel of my mind had been warped into a quasi-hallucination. It was like I just got thrown into a psychedelic experience within seconds. I could feel my sense of self in space loud and clear, but my mind was drunk in this liminal shared space of mind, but there was no reduction in clarity of thought. What was awaiting me on the other side? A male hominid. Huge. I am only human in the face of this being. He did not look directly at me, almost looking past me within this mental space. He was up on the hill along the way further north, to the right, less than half a kilometer away. I could just tell. If you've experienced anything like this, you just know. They have language and the concept of abstract thought. They maintain ancestral genetic memory in a way only a psychic primate can. And they hate fire. Hate it. Why do you do this? He said this through a combination of psychic body language and mental imagery. The warmth is our home. I say in return, imagining us huddled around a fire keeping warm during a freezing night. Why do you destroy? Play with fire? He asks. I could tell he wasn't blaming me personally, but rather that I was representing our species at that moment. He was not offended by my fire, the rain is why he decided to trust me. A shared vision arose. Of early hominids running into fires to grab sticks to whack each other with. Some of these fires were not devastating until they started playing with them. When some primates decided to not fear the fire, they split off. The beings I was speaking with never touched it, they never felt the desire for power over fire. They feared us. They ran away. We followed suit. They still fear us. You are the Skinwalkers. He says. This time, he glanced at me sideways with more intensity. And you know what? We are. Humans are the demons of native tradition. We are composed solely of bone and skin. We embody the terrifying creatures that lurk in the shadows. And I looked to him, scared. I was heartbroken. Why? Why? And he looked at me one final time, upset. Why, if you are so small, are you so loud when you walk? He was not angry, but rather confused and sad. Man carries a pain that makes us heavy. I spoke with the little energy I had remaining. And that was it. The visions left just as quickly as they showed up. Instant sobriety. Exhaustion. Melancholy. I stayed up the rest of the night, feeling a sense of exhaustion and melancholy. Eventually the homie woke up, took one look at me, and said. You saw it, huh? Yup, telepathic Sasquatch. Great success. That means we can go. Lamau, the whole ride back into town I looked around feeling like, all y'all skinwalkers, I'm the truth. I don't identify as a skinwalker. I eventually came back to regular reality in respect to how I live and love my life. It's been up and down in the world of people, and I've got things to work on. However, the paranormal has never ended, and I am so privileged for that. I don't have a choice but to believe that maybe one day I shall walk into the wild silently, and the forest shall be proud. Stay safe and blessed out there. Peace, y'all. The small house. I was out riding my quad one afternoon, just cruising around the back roads near the edge of the forest. My mind kept drifting to that old house hidden deep in the woods. I'd seen it before from a distance, but something about it always stuck with me, like it didn't belong, or maybe like it had been forgotten for too long. This time, I decided to head toward it. The path opened into a clearing, and there it was, weathered, quiet, surrounded by thick trees. The main door was blocked by debris, fallen branches, old metal sheets, and other junk, like someone had tried to keep people out or something in. Next to the house was a small outbuilding, kind of like a shed or an old barn. There was also an outdoor toilet, the kind you'd expect from a century ago. I decided to check it out. Inside the barn, I found some strange stuff, old black and white photos of people I didn't recognize, some oddly personal ones too. A few of them looked like nudist photos, and one was what looked like an invitation to a striptease event. It was all yellowed, decades old, maybe even from the early 1900s. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe it was just something weird that used to go on in the village back then. Alongside those were family portraits, faded, torn at the edges. They looked like they were from the late 1800s. A man, a woman, and two children stared blankly, as if they understood something I didn't. Something about the place gave me a really uneasy feeling. The feeling was not exactly one of danger, but rather one of unease. Behind the barn, there was a small trail leading deeper into the woods. I thought about taking it with the quad, but something about it didn't sit right with me. The place seemed unsuitable for me. So I left it for now. I went into the old toilet just to check it out. It was dusty and decayed but otherwise normal, nothing weird in there. At that point, I shrugged the whole thing off as just an old abandoned property, probably forgotten by whoever used to live there. But that wasn't the last time I visited. The next time I went back, everything was different. The house had one of its windows shattered. The trail that had once been narrow was now completely torn up, like something huge had moved through it. Trees bent, brush flattened, rot everywhere. It felt unnatural. Not like time passing, but like something had forced its way through. Inside the barn, everything had been moved. It looked like something, or someone, had wrecked the place. Not in a casual, messy way, but violently. Tools were thrown around, the ground was torn up, like a bulldozer had gone through it. But there were no tire tracks. No signs of vehicles. Just chaos. And that family photo I saw the first time? It was gone. I searched for it. I checked all over, but it wasn't there anymore. Not just moved, gone, no one lives there. I've been by several times and never seen another soul. The village nearby is practically empty. No signs of life, no signs that the house has an owner. It's abandoned. But every time I go back, something has changed. Things are moved. Damaged. Or just missing. I still don't know what's going on out there. Before the window was broken, before the barn got wrecked, and agree it's not normal. Something isn't right about that place. Midnight hike. To preface myself, this hiking trip is not the one and only occasion in which I have encountered something beyond the strange, unusual, and explainable. I am and have always been an avid outdoors person who enjoys the woods, mountains, and general solitude of the wilderness. I would not claim myself to be afraid of the dark woods or nighttime in the mountains, nor am I superstitious in my everyday life. However, my personal encounters force me to consider a wide and unorthodox realm of what is possible. This experience took place on Christmas Eve 2005. I was on break from the University of Arizona during my freshman year. Usually my parents, two sisters, and I either host extended family or travel and be guests of family for Christmas. That Christmas we decided to spend a small holiday at home, just the five of us. Having gotten used to being a very active college student, I became restless hanging around the house all day and night. I decided to take a nighttime hike at a nearby lake. I pack a bag, food for 2 days, a backpack stove, and extra winter clothes. The snow at my house was about 6 inches, so I expected at least 2 feet along the trail, and I tend to overpack because shit happens when you are least prepared. It was roughly 10 p.m. when I left the house, and it took me approximately 90 minutes to reach the lake. The lake and forest around it are roughly 8 or 10 miles east of the Navajo Nation as the crow flies. The trail I intended to hike was only 3.5 miles and led to a fire tower. I had hiked this trail a few dozen times since I was 7 or 8 and had become very familiar with a very large portion of the surrounding area. Because of this, I expected an easy and uneventful hike to tire me out and ease my restlessness. I pulled into the staging area for the trailhead, got out of my truck, and gathered my pack along with final checks for emergency essentials. I reached the trailhead, and as expected, the trail was untouched and covered in roughly 18 inches of snow. The snow was not real soft but not real firm and icy either. The crust of the snow broke easily under my bootsteps but did so with a very loud crunch that seemed to sharply crack the cold, crisp silence of the night. Believe me, it was a very quiet night. Soon I fell into a nice, comfortable, but quick pace, an instinctive hiking pace I have developed. The trail began in a very lightly wooded flat and slowly meandered into a moderately wooded dell that continued for a half mile or so. At this time I knew the switchbacks would begin to carry me up the hillside. I would estimate I was 75 or 80 yards from the first switchback when I noticed I had substantially slowed my pace and caught myself instinctively scanning the area in front of me. This is a posture I usually assume when I am hunting or stalking big game through the forest. After I caught myself the first time, I thought nothing of it. The second time I had caught myself doing the same thing was only a handful of moments later as I was near the second switchback. This time I paid more attention to my gut and kneeled down next to a stump. Up until this time I was using only my Petzl headlamp that, when on high, as it had been, throws off enough light to carry a beam roughly 50 or 60 yards. As I kneel next to the stump, I flip up my headlamp's red filter lens and turn the power setting to low, then proceed to listen carefully while scanning nearly 360 degrees around me. After 5 minutes or so, my eyes adjusted better to the darkness, and I caught a faint glow of red positioned roughly at the switchback in front of me. I decided to sit for a few minutes and continue to observe and listen while my eyes continued to adjust. The faint red glow never really seemed to disappear, but the intensity seemed to diminish at irregular intervals over those few minutes. I grew impatient and surmised there was a trail or survey reflector at the switchback that was catching my red filtered light. By the time I decided to stand up and proceed with my hike, I would guess 10 minutes had passed. As I stood upright, I pulled out my medium handheld maglite, flipped my headlamp back to high, and switched it from the red filter to the white LED. It was at this point when my state went from relaxed and calm to a sudden jump in that fight or flight feeling that only an adrenaline dump can produce. My two lights had easily lit up the switchback where I was observing the faint red light. However, I did not see the reflector I had told myself was the origin of the red glow. As I began the process of controlling my breathing and the feeling of panic and slowly stepped forward with uneasy suspicion, I noticed a red glow appearing several feet up the hill in front of me, just beyond the switchback and just beyond the beams of my two lights. Upon controlling my panic, I began to try and determine what this glow could be. The best, new answer I came up with was the reflection was from the eyes of some animal. This made sense to me, except I had never seen an animal with red reflective eyes, and never with such a hazy glow. The tales of mountain lions that ran these mountains and reports of a small pack of Mexican red wolves in this part of the state made the choice for me to turn around and head back down the trail. I slowly turned around and slowly walked the path I had just come no more than 15 minutes before. I thought it was a wise idea to keep my maglite shining behind me with hopes that if this was a predator animal, it might think I was still facing it as I retreated. I had turned the corner and began the slow walk to the base of the switchbacks. Again I got within 30 or 40 yards of the last turn that led to the dell when I saw the glow, only this time I made out a distinct set of two red glows with just enough space between the two to make them distinct and separate from each other. This is when I confirmed it was an animal, which put me at ease but also worried me because it did not follow me but actually cut me off on the trail as if it knowingly intercepted me in my retreat. I stood there weighing my options and risks. I could continue moving forward down the trail and hope the bold move would keep a buffer of at least 20 yards between the animal and myself. This option made me the most uneasy, so I opted for my second best way out. I could cut straight down the hillside through the somewhat thick woods, risking a twisted ankle or a bad spill with all the forest litter, stumps, and windfall trees masked by the deep snow. It seemed like the way to go. I proceeded carefully but quickly through the wood and snow on the ground until I reached the bottom and connected up with the trail. At this point I knew I was a good mile from my truck, and it was a flat, easy mile. Half was through the dell and the last half over the meadow. After only a few quick yards back to the truck, my gut told me to stop and turn around. I did just that. I cut off the trail a few steps and kneeled next to a smallish pine tree. This time I completely turned off my lamps and listened with an intense concentration. My instinct told me the crust on the snow should break under the foot of anything larger than a rabbit or raccoon. My eyes had only begun to adjust to the darkness when I saw the two red glows emerging from where I imagined the last switchback was and clearly but slowly moving away from the hillside. I tried to slow my breathing so I could better hear the footsteps of the animal that seemed to be curiously pursuing me. I would guess it had moved a fair amount of distance closer to me, and I guess 100 yards from my position. It did not seem to move with focused intent toward me, but it did seem to move with purpose. It was hard to judge distances accurately with such low light, so I told myself to stay silent and watch for 15 more seconds. Out of nowhere my brain seemed to have finally caught on to the fact that I had not heard a single sound since I had stopped. No snow crunching underfoot, not even a twig snapping, no sound that might suggest any animal moving through the winter night. Along with no sounds, I realized the red glow was not the reflection of eyes, there was no light to be reflected from an animal's eyes. So I finished my 15 seconds, stood up, turned, and took the few steps to the trail, where I turned my mag light and headlamp full on and proceeded with a quick pass. This is where panic really started and stayed with me. Every 20 or 30 yards I would stop, turn around, and listen. After the second stop it became clear the two red glows were following me but staying just out of reach of my light beams. As much as I tried to control myself, panic continually pushed harder and harder to take control, so I began to pick the pace up. Whatever it was followed and remained outside of my lights. After several minutes of escalating panic and on the verge of a dead run, I could see my headlights lightly reflecting the white LED light of my headlamp, and I knew I was within 100 yards of safety and escape. But, as before, something screamed at me to stop, kill my lights, kneel, and listen. I did just that, but being in a meadow, I could not stoop next to a stump or tree to help break my silhouette, so I kneeled down and concentrated. This time the red glows continued to move slowly closer. I expected they would stay out of my beam, which is roughly 60 yards from me, so that's where I figured they would stay even with my lamps off. No such luck, the pair of close-set red glows came just close enough to me that my eyes could not make out a figure, shadow, or silhouette or make any distinctions between what they were and the night in the forest. The speed with which the two had closed the 60 yards or so was astoundingly quick, and with not a sound to go with it or any other movement you might associate with something running at you. I could do nothing but watch in awe as they stopped and began to grow in intensity. As the intensity grew, they elevated themselves from roughly 2 feet off the snow to what I would guess was 10 or 12 feet off the snow. At this point the brightness of each seems to peak at approximately the brightness of a desk lamp. The light shone on the snow and the tree boughs to either side, but it did not seem to shine on objects behind it. After reaching this peak height and brightness, the two very slowly separated, maintaining everything about them except their distance from each other. They finally stopped 6 feet from each other, and just as they stopped, a third red glow came quickly up behind them and stopped right in line with the original two. I'm not sure if the third one suddenly materialized at the foot of the hill or if it had followed the same path I had just taken, but my attention was captivated by the two in front of me. However it came about, I instantly decided the best idea was to get up and book it back to my truck. So I did just that. I ran as fast as I felt I ever had, pack and all, with no light. I crashed recklessly through the snow with a panic-driven focus only to get to my truck. When I finally reached my truck, I jumped in, turned the key, and immediately switched on my high beams. The three were still able to stay just out of the beams of my headlights. I backed out and left down the snow-packed forest road. My truck's four-wheel drive was already engaged from the drive-in, so I drove as quickly as I could. After the first mile or so I figured I had left the red glows behind but continued to check my mirrors obsessively. Then I checked and saw the faint, hazy glow of two, and when I put my attention back on the road, I saw the third just beyond my high beams. I tried to keep my fear in check so that I could maintain control of my truck. The three stayed in their initial positions the 20 minutes it took to get down the mountain, but upon reaching the small community at the bottom, they simply vanished. They didn't fade away or slowly peel away from me, they were there and then gone. At this time I was so relieved I was off the mountain, out of the forest, no longer being followed, and had regained cell service. I began to shake and pretty much lost all composure. A feeling of absolutely no control over myself or emotions came over me, and all I could do was continue to drive. I called my parents to inform them that I was heading home and had safely made it off the mountain. My mom apparently heard the strain and stress in my voice and pushed at the matter. I struggled to convey a brief and disjointed account of what had just happened. At that point, it was nearly 1:30 a.m., and she instructed me to come straight home, which I was fully determined to do. Before she hung up, she told me to call a family friend who lived in the area and knew it very well and was Navajo like my family and I are. So I call him, wake him up, but this time around I am able to deliver a more detailed, more concise, and less emotional account of what happened to me in the previous hour or more. My experience was like nothing he had ever heard of before. By the time our conversation was finished, I was still 15 or 20 minutes from home, still with adrenaline in my system and no answers. I sat there and thought about it over and over again. When I got home, I tried but never slept the night. Christmas Day was a dull passing of hours. I thought only of what had clearly chased me and all the odd and wild aspects of the glowing things that I did truly, without a doubt, see. I did not sleep for another 2 nights after that Christmas Eve. After that night I sought a few people who knew the area very well and asked if they saw or heard about anything odd up there. Some said no, and others came up with what seemed to me as the generic ghost stories that happened to the cousin of a friend's friend. I passed these off as nonsense and camp tales. So, to this day I have no answers or hints as to what happened that night. Over the years I have been able to put it back together as closely as I can remember, and some of the things I know I saw and felt are things I cannot shake. I have never felt such fear and lack of control over everything as I did that moment when I realized the 3 red glows were gone. I maintained so much more control over myself during the actual event than I did when I thought it was over. I have not returned to that area since that night, not only because of fear and apprehension, but also because I have never had a reason to go back there. If anybody has any theories or guesses, even suggestions, as to what it is, was, might have been, or caused it all, please feel free to speak up. Thank you for listening and for creating a space where I can finally write this down. Something is whistling outside in the dark. I've always been kind of a night owl, and during COVID I've been spending time out in my garage in my man cave so that I can listen to music or watch television without keeping my wife awake. For the last couple of weeks, very late at night, I've heard someone or something outside whistling. It sounds very much like a person whistling, but it's kind of random, tuneless whistling. I've gone outside with a flashlight, and there's no one around. I live on a pretty large piece of property, but it's a gated property, and it's not easy to just come walking in here. But the whistling sounds very nearby. Maybe 30 feet away. And there's just no one there. I've never encountered anything quite like this, and I don't know what to make of it. But it's getting pretty creepy. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Missing, a camping horror story. I remember feeling odd the whole trip, although our camping trips were fairly routine at that point. Every month, my best friend Josh and I would pick a weekend and head to a nearby forest for a couple of days of hunting or fishing. This time around, we had chosen a scenic valley near the base of Mount Rainier with a cabin built on a small ridge right above the river. We made the decision to attempt gold panning, and I loaded my Jeep with shovels, pans, and even a sluice box that Josh's dad had lent us a few days ago. He'd also contacted the claim owner for us and got permission so we could mine his gold. "You got your GPS?" Caitlin asked as she packed up some sandwiches for the road and put them in my backpack. I walked over and kissed her while brushing a stray strand of her black hair from her face. "Of course, hun," I replied. "I promise no repeat of what happened last fall." Last fall, Josh and I had gotten lost due to some extenuating circumstances. The point is, we learned the importance of keeping a good, high-quality GPS on hand. Trust me, in a bad situation it's a lifesaver. Josh and I had grown up together. As kids, Josh and I shared a common love for anime, video games, and the outdoors, which solidified our bond as inseparable friends. When I was hospitalized in grade school after getting hit by a truck, Josh was at my side, cracking jokes, and he was the one who took pride in painting me as a total sleazeball at my wedding sit-down dinner when he gave his best man toast. There used to be a great picture of us together, groom and best man, but I had found it a few nights ago, and Josh's image had been burned off. A grim reminder of the fire that burned a couple of rooms in my house last year. Once my wife had ensured everything was in order, she kissed me and sent me on my way. A short drive took me to Josh's house. Josh had his long black hair in a ponytail and was swinging his daughter Samantha around in the air as her musical laughter filled my ears. "Uncle Gray!" she screamed as Josh set her down, and I stepped out of my Jeep. She ran around and hugged me at the knees, laughing. Then she stepped back, looking towards her house as if she'd just remembered something, and took off running with a small wave. Josh laughed as he fondly watched his daughter run inside. "I'll go get my bags, bud. You want anything? A beer?" I shook my head. "Well, I'm not bothered," he said. "You still have to come say hi to Cassandra. She's going to feed you, so just sit down and eat." Cassandra was raised by her grandmother and had the habit of cooking for anyone that came over ingrained into her being. I chuckled and walked to the kitchen. At least her food was wonderful. It took about 45 minutes for Cassandra to be satisfied we'd eaten enough to let us leave. As we loaded up into the Jeep, Samantha came running outside with 2 brown paper bags. "Here, Daddy, Uncle Gray, I love you," she said, handing us each a bag, followed by a kiss on the cheek. She and Cassandra stood on the driveway waving at us as we left. It didn't take us long to arrive at the cabin. We each took a moment to call our wives and let them know we made it safely. Then we headed to the river to try some panning. I found a shallow area where I was able to set up the sluice, and Josh dug up a bucket of dirt and squatted in some shallow water to do some serious panning. After a few hours we had each retrieved small amounts of gold. While it wasn't enough to make us wealthy, it was sufficient for each of us to return home with a piece of shiny gold. When we went back inside, Josh showed me this ugly little figure he'd found. It looked like something out of one of those Blair Witch movies. I told him to get rid of it, as it had some bad juju. He shrugged and tossed it into the firewood. That night by the campfire, the uneasy feeling had returned. The night felt off. Even the joint wasn't helping me relax. The trees looked more gnarled than usual, and some long shadows seemed to move on their own. Josh was by the fire roasting a hot dog when we heard it. A distinct howl filled the valley, making my hair stand on end and chills run down my spine. Wolves aren't unheard of here in Washington, but they're not very common. I also noticed, at that moment, that all the nighttime sounds had stopped. The crickets, frogs, and owls were all completely silent. Feeling instantly nervous and alert, I dropped the joint as my eyes scanned the tree line. It was dark and difficult to see into the darkness after staring into the fire, but I could vaguely see a few hunched over shapes slowly creeping towards us. I started walking backwards, not taking my eyes off the dark and taunting shadows. The vague outlines danced in and out of my vision as my eyes adjusted to the shades of darkness in front of me. I could sense Josh walking backwards next to me. And then, on an unspoken cue, we both took off sprinting to the door. We got inside and slammed it shut, sliding the locks into place as we caught our breath and made shushing gestures at each other. We both listened as, whatever it was, it slowly walked around and inspected our campsite. We heard loud sniffing, a bag being ruffled. And then a strange sound that was like something wooden being knocked on the door. We heard an angry growl, and then everything got quiet. I almost dared not look at one of the windows illuminated by our still crackling fire, but I had to. Fortunately, I didn't see anything terrifying. But at that moment, we heard something that made everything we'd experienced so far that night turn into a stroll in the park. Laughter. To be specific, it sounded like a little girl laughing outside. It sounded just like Samantha laughing outside. Josh's eyes were wide open, and a look of anguish crossed his face as he ripped the door open. There was nothing there. He screamed Sam, and took off running into the woods. I tore off after him, but no matter how fast I went, he kept picking up distance on me until eventually he vanished out of sight in the tree line. I kept hearing that childlike laugh, just out of distance, in the shadows, teasing me. Before it disappeared completely. It was as if someone flicked a switch. All the animals regained their voices, the sound of crickets chirping was thick in the air, and I heard the hoot of an owl far off in the distance. I spent the next 2 hours searching, calling out Josh's name. To no avail. I couldn't even find any tracks to follow. When I finally did lie down, it was very late, and I barely slept. I woke up the next morning to find all of our equipment and supplies still there, but no sign of Josh. I walked into the woods yelling for him, looking for any signs of his passing. Nothing. I dialed his phone number, but it remained unanswered until the voicemail system took over. I realized then that I was going to have to organize a search party. I called my wife to inform her about the situation, but she interrupted me almost immediately and asked, "Who is Josh?" "You know who Josh is, he's my best friend." "You don't hang out with anyone named Josh," she insisted, "unless you're keeping something from me." I laughed. "Ha ha, that's very good. Okay, fine, I'll play along. He was the best man at our wedding. He has an adorable girl named Samantha who loves her Aunt Caitlin." I expected to get a laugh from her. Instead, what she said made that terrible feeling return. "Babe, are you okay?" she asked, and she suddenly sounded distressed. "Come home right away, sweetie, you're not making any sense." I promised I'd be home soon, hung up, and called Cassandra's phone, expecting Samantha to pick it up like she usually does. Instead Cassandra answered. She sounded worn out. "Cass," I said, "Cass, listen to me. Last night Josh heard something that sounded like Samantha and ran off into the woods. Now I can't find him." "Who's Samantha?" she said. "Who's Josh? And who the hell are you? How did you get my number?" The interaction went downhill from there. She soon hung up on me. I felt like I was going to be sick. None of this made sense. First, there was the conversation with my wife, and then there was the one with Cassandra. I'd love to say I figured out what happened. But no. Nothing has been the same since that camping trip. And I doubt that it will ever make any sense. I've spoken to Josh's parents, they remember me just fine, but just like everyone else, they insist that Josh and Samantha aren't real. I'm gradually grasping the notion that they might have vanished in some way. I'm grappling with the notion that they ceased to exist completely. I have no idea what we encountered in the woods that night. I have no idea why these things happened. What I know is just a minute ago I found 2 brown paper bags with chocolate chip cookies in my Jeep. If Josh and Sam aren't real, where did the cookies come from? Josh, Samantha, wherever you are, I hope you are well. Weird, bright white light I saw outside of my bedroom door. This happened around 3 to 4 years ago. I was living with my mom, stepdad, and older sister at the time in a condo that we since moved out of. One night while going to bed, I got into a heated argument with my mom over something probably very stupid, and to guilt trip me, which she does all the ducking time, she said that tonight was the death anniversary of my Lola and she would be mad that I was fighting with my mom. Naturally I was distraught over this, asking why she didn't tell me sooner so I would have paid my respects and behaved. Looking back, she most likely told me before, but I forgot. I ran into my room, shut the door, and started to bawl my eyes out. I was sobbing really hard, to the point I was gasping for air. I was tossing and turning in bed, beating myself over the fight. Then, when I turned over and faced my door, I saw it. A pure white light that looked as if the source was right behind the door. Then, upon looking at it, there was a sudden rush of calmness that washed over me. Not euphoria but comfort that made me stop crying. I got up and stared at it, deeply confused. I was contemplating opening the door, but I was too afraid to. The light was luminous, a light you would think would be used to light up a huge studio, let alone a small space leading to the stairs. It didn't shine through the crack under the door, and I didn't hear anything coming from outside. I decided to lay back down and close my eyes, and after about 5 minutes the light was gone. I fell asleep after that. The next day I tried to recreate the lighting with my phone, bathroom, and ceiling lights, to which none of them looked like the light I saw the night prior. I asked my mom about it because I knew she works in the kitchen late at night, and she told me she didn't see nor hear anything. My sister, whose room is right next to mine, also didn't see anything suspicious. I was told it was my Lola/angel visiting me, and honestly, that's the only reasonable explanation for what happened. I'm usually a skeptic when it comes to paranormal stuff, but this I simply can't explain. Cabin in the woods, fiction. The 4 of us hunkered behind the fallen tree, looking through the binoculars in turns as we surveyed the cabin. The cabin had been abandoned for as long as we could remember, and now, suddenly, there was a candle burning in the window. Undoubtedly, this summer would remain etched in our memories. Richie, James, Terry, and I had been friends since kindergarten, and we had spent every summer playing around the neighborhood and having fun. This summer, however, was special. We were 11 this year, or close enough to make no difference, and some of the restrictions had been taken off of us. We could ride our bikes a little farther, stay out a little closer to dark, and explore the woods around our house, as long as we went in a group. The woods had long been a source of restricted adventure for us, but now we were free to explore them as we chose. That first day of summer, we all met at my house with backpacks and camping gear so we could start exploring. Terry had paper and intended to make a map of the woods. Richie brought his dad's tools to build forts or bases in the woods. James's air rifle was poking out of his bag, and my wrist rocket was hanging from my shorts. We experienced a sense of adventure as we prepared to venture into uncharted territory, certain that this summer would be unforgettable. We began by exploring the places we knew in the woods, places our dads had taken us camping or our parents had let us go to on our own. Terry made a crude map for us to follow, and as the summer unfolded, the map got bigger and bigger. Soon the small camp and the creek were joined by the berry bushes, the big rock, the snake sighting place. We had seen a big black snake there, but it had slithered away, and the cabin. The cabin was the oddest thing we had found in the woods. Although it appeared deserted, its impeccable maintenance suggested its ownership. The land was well kept as well. The trees would have made it hard to get a car in there, and there was no trail. We figured it was some forest dweller's summer cabin or something and left it alone. However, we found other activities to occupy our time, and we quickly forgot about the cabin. We spent the first month of summer building forts and making a raft so we could sail down the creek. We thought we might play pirates if we had a raft, and we started lashing some of the big logs together with some rope from my dad's shed. We made a sail from some old sheets. The raft was laughably small, only one of us could have fit comfortably on it at a time, but we still had fun imagining the 4 of us sailing up the creek to the small lake it led to. On July 1st, the first weekend of high summer, we asked our parents if we could camp out in the woods for the weekend. We had all been in Boy Scouts for a few years, and we'd all gone camping before. We thought we could survive in the woods with food and shelter. To our surprise, our parents agreed on the grounds that we do not camp too far in the woods, and we marked on a map where we would be so they could find us. No more than a mile into the woods, my dad had said, and make sure you clean up after yourself so you don't attract anything you can't handle. So we packed our knapsacks and prepared for a weekend in the wonderful outdoors. We didn't know we were so close to the cabin until Terry returned with firewood and told us about the candle burning. Terry was the last one to return from our errands. I set up the tents, Richie got water from the creek, James dug the latrine, and Terry collected firewood. When he finally arrived, it was already late afternoon, and the hot dogs in the cooler were beckoning us. He dropped the firewood and told us that we had to come see this. And so here we were, watching the cabin for signs of life. Other than the candle, however, there wasn't much to see. The cabin was as cold and empty as ever, with no car outside, no lights on, and only a candle to keep it warm. As it grew darker and no lights came on inside either, we lost interest in the cabin and returned to our campsite. It had been a momentary curiosity at best, but our stomachs were grumbling, and we were ready for dinner. As the darkness settled around us, we roasted our weenies on sticks over the fire. We were laughing around the fire and talking about our weekend adventures. James had put some root beers in the cooler, and we were breaking out the Jiffy Pop as we prepared to tell ghost stories. Ghost stories played a significant role in our campouts, and we aimed to surpass each other by sharing terrifying tales that could rival any we had ever read. "I've got one," Terry said, letting his hot dog slowly turn into a charcoal lump. "I read it on No Sleep. This person lives with his grandpa, and he said his friend turned into a tree." Terry laid out the story, building up as he told about kids exploring the woods and finding a special grove. We all listened, leaning in a little as he wove the tale. The story wasn't really scary as much as it was sad, but the atmosphere of the dark woods made it all seem pretty spooky nonetheless. I was reaching to get a second hot dog, the first having been eaten in 3 bites, when I thought I heard something out in the woods. It sounded big, bigger than us at least, and I took out the little flashlight I had and shone it into the forest. James looked up from spearing another hot dog, craning his neck to look out into the spot my flashlight was illuminating. "Something out there?" he asked. "No clue, but I thought I heard something." They all turned to look, peering into the murky darkness, but whatever it was had either moved on or was still. "I've got one," Richie said. "It's pretty scary, though. I hope you guys can handle it." We all laughed, throwing a few marshmallows at him before he leaned in and started his story. There were 4 friends out on a camping trip. They were staying the night in the woods, just their sleeping bags and the fire to keep them safe against the elements. Well, they had felt all night like something was watching them, so they decided to set a watch to make sure that nothing snuck up on them. They would each keep watch for 2 hours while the others slept, and as the others settled in, the first boy sat and watched the night. The fire crackled as we listened, and I thought I heard the snap of a twig again. Was something out there? Was it stalking us? It sounded big, but I thought it could just be a deer or a possum or something. This story isn't about him, though. This story isn't about the second boy either. This story is about the third boy, the one who must watch through the depths of the night. No sooner had the second boy shaken him awake than he found himself curled in his sleeping bag, snoring happily. The third boy had slept for a few hours, but he was still worn out. He disliked staying up late, preferring to snuggle into his bed as the sun set. He sat by the fire, feeling the warmth wafting into his face, which made him feel warm and comfy as he began to drowse. I heard a stick crack to my left and cut my eyes in that direction. Just then, something stepped on a branch out in the woods, and the boy found his drowsiness melting away. What was that? Some sort of animal? A person? Could it be a creature preparing to devour him? The boy sat up a little straighter, but he was exhausted. He could barely keep his eyes open, and the fire felt wonderful. I could see something from the corner of my eye, but I couldn't be certain what it was. An animal? A person? Is a monster coming to eat us? He looked around, but he could see nothing. The small fire did little to light the forest around him, so he reached for more wood and began to build it up again. His hands shook with each piece he grabbed, and the coals danced as he slid the fresh logs into the flames. He soon had the fire raging, creating a burning pyre that threatened to ignite the lowest branches, yet he could still see only the faintest outline of whatever was stalking him. Whatever it was looked big, like a bear but bigger. It had a towering presence that made it appear monstrous in the dancing light of our campfire. It appeared to be wearing clothes, but I couldn't be certain. Was that a dress? Could it be a robe? It was coming closer as we all sat raptly and listened to Richie's story. He watched the shape as it stalked closer, unable to tell what it might be. It was so big, it could be anything. A bear, a person, anything could be in these dark woods. He took one of the burning sticks from the fire and held it out before him like a torch, trying to ward off whatever this diabolical creature might be. It came on, heedless of the burning stick, and the boy began to scream as it stepped into the firelight, and he caught sight of his stalker. This creature was not as bold. The creature retreated slightly, not daring to approach close enough for detection. When they found the boys, all of them had been killed. Of the 3 that had been in the sleeping bags, nothing was ever found. The bags themselves were soaked with a significant amount of blood. However, they found the watcher still at his post. He leaned in, the fire making his face look sinister. Fear paralyzed him, causing his heart to stop in terror. I turned then, looking over Terry's shoulder and into the woods, but whatever it had been was gone. "Wow," James said, putting a fresh marshmallow on to replace the one that had fallen into the fire as he sat listening. "That was a great story." I agreed, scouting around behind them for the shape. "I bet I know who scared him so bad," James said, a little smile on his lips. "I bet it was Soap Sally." A chill ran up my spine. "Don't even say her name out here," I quavered, the others looking just as shocked. It was not appropriate to make jokes about Soap Sally in the woods at night. Soap Sally was a local legend, a washerwoman who had done her washing at the watering hole for as long as anyone could remember. She made her own soap and made candles too, and she was said to be able to make spells and potions as well. When she was found to be making her soap out of the bones of runaway children, she was burned as a witch with only the briefest of trials. She was still used as a way to scare bad kids into doing what they were supposed to be doing, and there were still disappearances from time to time. "I heard a rumor that Soap Sally took those kids who went missing in the next town," James continued, clearly intending to capitalize on this story. "James," I started, but I tensed when I heard the stick snap too close to our campsite. "I hear she found them out past curfew and just snatched them up. They ran, but she caught them all and made soap in her lair." From behind James, a shape rose, a looming shadow that seemed to grow from the ground. I gasped, looking at Terry and Richie as it rose over 6 feet tall. Their mouths were hanging open, their eyes as big as dinner plates, and James clearly thought we were scared by his story. Then she chopped them into pieces and boiled off all the fat from their bodies. She made soap from them, and their parents washed their hands with it the next day. They never knew they were washing themselves with the bodies of their dead kids, and somewhere that old crone laughed at them. As they mourned their loss, she laughed and laughed, stalking the night as she looked for more children, but he had clearly noticed us as we crab walked away from him, rolling his eyes and laughing. "Come on, guys, it's just a story. Quit goofing," but he gasped as the long black nails clenched his shoulders. When the monstrous woman bent down, her mouth full of sharp teeth grinning much too wide, he began to scream like a stuck hog. We all screamed then, running into the woods like bullets fired from a gun. James screamed behind us, begging us to help him, but we were only 11. What could we do against something like that? We all stayed together, and as we realized that my house was the closest, we all ran for it. The moon was high and bright, and if it hadn't been nearly full, we'd have likely never found our way. The woods, where we had often played, appeared menacing, akin to a forest from a children's fairy tale, and our goal was to reach home safety before the witch could ensnare us. Every limb that grabbed our shirt was a witch's claw, every hole that tried to stop us was a hand coming out to catch us, and every sound was that horrid creature in hot pursuit. As we broke through the tree line and reached the row of fences that marked our neighborhood, we felt a sense of relief. My dad was having a beer on the back porch when we got there, and it seemed that Richie's dad had decided to join him since they were both childless tonight. It was only about 9:30, and both of them looked up expectantly as we came running up. "You boys get spooked by a deer already?" My dad joked, seeming to realize we were one short. "Where's James?" I sobbed while trying to catch my breath, and Dad must have sensed enough to understand that someone had taken James. He got us all inside and called the police, Richie's dad calling James's parents as he did. Before long, everyone's parents were there, and the men had begun searching the woods. Dad wanted to take us with him, but we all refused to go. We'd had a scare, and when the police arrived, the whole group took to the woods to find James. They came back a few hours later to tell us that there had been no sign of him at our campsite. "Is there anywhere that you can think of that he might be, boys? Maybe somewhere in the woods where this person might have taken him?" He said person because they refused to believe any kind of Soap Sally talk. They wanted this kept in the real world, and that meant that if a woman had taken an 11-year-old boy against his will, then they were likely close. "The cabin," Richie almost hissed, looking at us for support. "Remember? We saw the candle burning there earlier. Maybe it's her cabin." We pointed out the cabin on the map, and they told us to stay while they checked it out. After an hour, I heard the back door open and the 4 dejected fathers from my group shuffled in. They told the 3 of us to head off to bed so they could talk, but we hunkered at the top of the stairs and listened as they told what they'd seen. James's mother cried a lot, his father holding her tight. The police were still there. The sheriff had called in more deputies from a neighboring town, and they were searching the cabin from top to bottom. They had found the door unlocked, and when they'd gone inside, they had discovered that the cabin wasn't just someone's summer home. There was so much blood, and the police had found the remains of children in that place. The remains included bones, clothes, skin, hair, and bowls of fat that had yet to be rendered into tallow. The kitchen had several items for making soap, and they said the stove was still hot when they arrived. They'd found a shirt on top of the pile, and James's father had identified it as the one James had been wearing when he left home that afternoon. They searched those woods for 3 days, but they never found James. Then, one morning, he unexpectedly showed up at his parents' doorstep. I was eating dinner that night, still reeling from what I had been through in the woods, as Mom discussed how wonderful it had been that the community had come together to support James's family. I went to deliver a casserole to her this morning, and she was sorting through the gifts the town had left for her. There were casseroles, gift cards, grocery bags, and even a nice bag of soaps that had been delivered by someone. My mouth went dry when I heard that, and I asked her what she meant. Well, someone had delivered a bag of soaps to them this morning. They really looked lovely, handmade, and so smooth. She told me I could have some of it if I wanted. I left it in the upstairs bathroom for you guys to use. My mom stopped talking when I started hyperventilating. I don't think the police took us seriously at first, but once they did whatever they did with the soap and found bone fragments in it, they started taking us a lot more seriously. After that, the hospital admitted James's mother into a full-blown catatonic state, prompting a redoubled search for the killer. That was a long and strange summer full of curfews and many dads riding around on neighborhood watch detail as they took the kids from summer school to home or to and from summer events. My friends and I never expected that they would find the woman who took James, and in fact, they never did. We never went into those woods again. It's been years since that campout, but occasionally I still look at the woods from the back porch and swear I can see the specter of Soap Sally as she looms at the edge of the woods. I graduate high school this year, and I think I might just get as far away from this town and my childhood as possible. I can't imagine raising kids in a place where they could wind up as bricks of soap on your porch.